The 2014-15 Budget Committee roll call and introductions. And rather than going through the formal roll call, I think I'll just ask to start to the left. We got, I think, one new member on our Budget Committee. And I'll start with the left and not only say who you are, but what you do. Let's start with you, yeah.
Wyatt Parno, Finance Director for the City of Oregon City.
David Frazier, City Manager.
Betty Lum, Oregon City Commissioner.
Kathy Roth, Oregon City Commissioner.
Laura Zentner, I work for Clackamas County as their Deputy Director.
And I'm Robert Stoll, and I work for Multnomah County as a Finance Supervisor and Community Justice.
My name is William Gifford.
You got
Oregon City.
Do you want to say anything about yourself? No? Okay, go ahead.
What do you want to know? I was born at a very early age.
Carol Pauley, Oregon City Commissioner.
Rocky Smith, Oregon City Commission.
Autumn Russell, citizen member, banking.
Chris Geiger, Citizen Member Fire.
And Doug Neely, Mayor of Oregon City. We'll review the process, the authority, and the decisions before we actually elect a chair, and our Budget Director, Wyatt Parno, will. Oh, do you want to introduce your assistant? Is she?
Yes, I would love to. Maria McElveen is in the audience, I believe. There she is. Yes, instrumental in putting this budget document together. Thank you, Maria.
Not assistant, their title is what?
She's the Deputy Finance
Deputy,
Director.
deputy, right. And yes, and then go ahead if you would.
Thank you, Mayor. Under Oregon law, the Budget Committee process is as follows. City Manager David Frazier, the Budget Officer, is required to deliver the budget message at this meeting. The Budget Committee is required to provide an opportunity for questions or comments from an interested person in the audience. After reviewing the budget and hearing public comments, the Budget Committee will approve the budget as proposed or with changes. The committee must also specify the rate or amount of each ad valorem tax levy and do so for each of the 2 years of the biennial budget. For Oregon City, the committee is asked to approve the tax rate for each of 2014 and 15 and for the fire bond levy amounts. And on the back of the agenda, items number 9 and 10 are the budget total, the tax rates, and the fire bond levy amounts. Once the budget is approved, no later than June 30th, the City Commission is required to hold a separate public hearing and take additional public comment, and then the Commission at that time may make changes with certain restrictions, and then shall adopt the budget. The City Commission meeting is scheduled for this year, June 19th, 2013. Well, before proceeding with this process, either the mayor or the former chair will call for motions to elect a new chair for the Budget Committee hearing and a secretary for the Budget Committee. The chair will monitor the agenda and run the proceedings, and the secretary is not required to keep minutes. They will be asked by the city recorder to take a lead role in reviewing the minutes that are prepared by city staff.
Would you just take a minute to say something about the switch to a biannual budget, because they'll still be new.
Yes, would be happy to, Mayor. So this is the first year that Oregon City will be using a biennial budget, and that was planned so that we can align with the City Commission election process and the goal-setting process, and it will also save hundreds, 800 hours of staff time that can be spent to do even more great projects. So it's basically really saving a lot of steps on administration. The biennial budget, essentially, we prepared it this year. Oregon revised statutes require that you present the budget very specifically in the prior periods on an annual basis. You can't combine them. It says that in local budget law. So we took the biennial budget this year and split it into 2 years just for discussion purposes, and then the total column throughout the budget is the biennial budget to be approved, which is close to about twice the budget that we had done in the past.
Will this committee meet next year again, even though we pass the biennial budget?
This committee will not meet next year again. We'll have, the next meeting will be 2 years from now, and we are committed as staff to provide an update halfway through the biennium so that everybody kind of knows where we're at and if we're still on target for the whole biennium.
How will that be accomplished? The checkpoint, the mid-biennium review.
In terms of what staff will do, what we'll probably do, we'll monitor throughout the biennium, particularly with this budget where we've got some pretty tight budgets, pretty tight ending fund balances. We'll be wanting to monitor throughout very carefully. And then we'll provide not an audited, but an internally generated document showing budget to actual for the first year. Provide that to all the committee members and ask for feedback. Thank you.
With that, the election for chairperson, do I hear nominations from the floor?
I move to recommend Robert Stoll.
My second. You realize I'm new, right?
That's the intent.
What could go wrong?
I believe Chris was our budget director, and I thought since he had the gavel, he was going to be nominated, but we'll go ahead, are there any other nominations from the floor?
We got one sucker, that's all we need.
I will nominate Laura, who happens to be sitting next to me.
I'd second that. We'll make it a competition. Do you each want to give a speech?
I'll make it easy, I'll decline. I really don't want to do it. So.
How's that?
I really don't want to do it,
In
actually.
other words, you're not accepting the nomination?
No, I'm not accepting the nomination.
Maybe someone with some experience at this, who's seen this before would be good. So, and anybody at all willing to volunteer? Anybody?
The complication of having more than one person nominated, we got to figure out how to do an election, because there's only been one nomination every year, and we haven't had to go through a process.
But I have to say, that is a valid point that you bring up, but also, we have a new finance director, and we have a new budget format. So everything's new for us, too. Just so.
I see where you're going with this.
Just so you feel better about yourself.
Robert, you will be returning next spring, right? I hope.
But, no, I understand what you're saying.
They provide great guidance and structure for people who've been in that position before.
You'll be fine.
Oh,
You might wonder why nobody else is volunteering.
apparently. So, well, in the interest of moving forward, I'd be more than happy to do that. Just direct me at where.
I think we formally, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No abstentions?
Bada bing, bada boom.
Acclaimed by the whole group. Take over.
There's the gavel.
gavel.
It's coming your way.
Okay, so then. Aha.
I've done it many times. It's like
So.
Good job, Chris. It's all right. Good to pick on the new guy.
It's an immersion experience.
Wait until I get to Wyatt's. I got the new guy. It's nice to have a little, maybe a little worse. It's a rainy weekend.
Okay, so I believe the next agenda item is the election of a secretary. Do I hear a motion for a nomination for secretary?
I'll nominate William Gifford.
Second. He
So
loves to be
we have a
secretary.
second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Woo-hoo, William.
So that brings us to review of city commission goals. City manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to introduce Katie Riggs, my assistant, and Katie's going to hand out the goals booklet and talk a little bit about our goals process.
And all of you have received your goals booklets, and for those of you in the audience, there are some over at the table there. The finance or the budget is based upon these goals, which the City Commission had their retreat in January and decided on the goals and priorities in this booklet. And that's what this budget is based upon, and we took those goals and we started with that to produce this wonderful budget document. Is there any questions about the goals or priorities?
No, but I'd like to just kind of make a comment if I could, Chair. Could we go around the audience and have the audience also introduce themselves, just so we know who's here?
These are city staff.
Would audience members and staff members like to do quick introductions for the good of the order?
So I already started. Katie
Yeah, there we
Riggs,
go.
Assistant to the city manager. Mariah Mackley, deputy finance director.
Scott Archer, Community Services Director.
Nancy Ice, city reporter. Kelly Burgoyne, city reporter. Diana Long, Office Specialist. My name is Heather Penny, I'm the Finance Director for Malala.
I just paid the bills.
I love it. We have to have you.
Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you. So,
Thank you for allowing that to occur.
thank you very much. So, are we ready to move on to review of minutes from April 15th? And so that is Nancy, city recorder. Oh. Motion to review the minutes and open discussion.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as written.
Second.
That's better. There we go. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. That's perfect. That's what I'm looking for, that community support. So that moves us up to item 7, receive a budget message from budget officer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're going to go through a slide presentation here. I have several slides that mirror the written document that you've all received. And we'll start with the technology. This tells you, this is kind of a roadmap of where we're going to go tonight in the presentation. I'll ask that you hold your questions till the end, but I'm sure that there will be plenty of time for discussion after I get through the presentation. So we're going to start with the all funds and then the general fund. We'll be talking then, breaking those funds down more or less by department. Then we'll talk about the budget highlights, which are all the funds that don't neatly fit into one of those categories. And then we're going to talk about some of the capital projects that you've accomplished through your budget direction from the last session, and then also some that are coming down the road, if you will. And then we'll have a summary and then time for questions after that and deliberation by the committee. So the overall budget is $132.4 million for the biennium. It's consistent with prior years. There aren't any real big surprises. The one that you will see that recurring throughout the document is the fact that the jug handle has been completed. That was a $22 million, a little over $22 million project, so obviously that has a big impact on the final number. You also see that there's an offset in increases ending the restricted fund balances for library and public works, and then $500,000 for the Willamette Falls Legacy Project, which some of you may know as the Blue Heron redevelopment site. And again, this budget was focused on the goals and priorities of the City Commission that were adopted in January of this year. So we'll go on to the first slide on all funds. We're going to talk about revenues first and then expenditures after that. So property taxes in the general fund are up $787,000 in 2014 and $248,000 in 2015. The increase in 2014 is due to a 25 cent per thousand assessed tax rate, primarily to fund new police officer positions in the city. We also showed district property taxes for the library having a modest increase of about $50,000. We also have franchise fee increases of approximately $200,000, and most of those are from the city's utilities. When you increase utility fees with cost of living, as the commission has directed, it does have also a positive impact on the franchise fee that's collected. We show intergovernmental revenues down quite a bit from the jug handle again. And the beginning balances increase in 2014 for transfers in 2013 to the library reserves and to the public works reserves. Any questions on this slide? I said hold questions to the end, and then I said any questions. Never mind.
Yeah, lots of questions.
So the expenditure slide that matches the revenue one that you just saw. And here we have personnel services going up $1.4 million in 2014 and $780,000 in 2015. Note that the positions were not added without new identified revenue sources or reducing costs to pay for the positions. We have reached a tentative agreement This is an example. We've reached a tenant agreement with the police union for a 3-year contract at 3% the first year and 2% each of the following years. Typically, we have 2-year contracts, but the 3 years saves us quite a bit of staff time and attorney's fees associated with negotiations. So we're pleased to report that, and hopefully it will come to fruition. We also have a new right-of-way ordinance coordinator in here that's funded by anticipated revenues from the new right-of-way ordinance that the commission has gone through a work session on and will soon go through a regular council meeting on. We also have 5% health insurance increases in 2014. I hate to say this, but this is the first time in about 7 years of my memory that there's been less than a double-digit increase in health care costs. So at least it's heading in the right direction. We are budgeting 10% in 2015 and hoping for another lower amount. It also includes a 5% PERS increase. 50% of those costs are absorbed by the city's PERS differential fund. It also includes temporary part-time planner budgeted in 2014 to handle the Blue Heron redevelopment project. That's also funded by anticipated revenues. The position is not funded in 2015. And then we have conversion of a part-time parks administration person and a part-time planner to full-time positions. So you also note here that materials and services are up $1.76 million in 2014 and down $1.26 million in 2015. The increases are anticipating a 3% cost in goods and contracts, $500,000 for the Willamette Falls project, $700,000 for sewer fees for Tri-City, $200,000 for South Fork pass-throughs, and another $200,000 in the school excise tax pass-through. Most of you probably know that the city actually collects the construction excise tax for schools, and then we send them the check each year. We also have a contingency or ending fund balance increasing in 2014 and decreasing in 2015 because we're going to be using some of those funds in 2014. And this is just a slide showing where the money comes from. You can see here that the vast majority of our services come from fees that we charge for services right here. We have a little smaller amount over here in property tax. And those of you who have been on the committee for a while probably have grown accustomed to me preaching about a city like Oregon City being a regional center and being a seat of county government in a really large populated county. We have a lot of tax-exempt properties. So the more that we can do this, the less we can have to do that, which actually works to the benefit of our tax-paying residents who bear the cost exclusively of tax increases. So we're trying more and more to fund services by charging for services so that everyone pays an equitable share. So we'll go on to the next slide. And this is all the funds. This is where the money goes. And it shows that, the large part of this goes to our personnel services because just as some examples, our public works and police, those are some of our larger departments. And obviously those things are not things that can be done without a lot of human capital. So you see the bulk of our funds being spent there. Also, we have quite a bit of our expenditures here in operating materials and services. This also includes outsourcing for contracts. So literally this whole section is about providing service through people. Then this section here is the capital portion. So that's a pretty healthy balance in my experience. And then there's some transfers up here. This category of 10%, there are a lot of cities that have not weathered this recession as well as Oregon City has that don't have any percent up there for transfers for other services. Those transfers fund special projects that we'll be talking about later in the budget. So we'll get right into the general fund. What's interesting about this is I want to draw your attention to this line down here. The 3 police officers. These officers will not be hired until or unless the water rollback goes away. And I don't need to remind you that that's on your ballot in May.
May 21st, I believe.
Yes, Betty, thank you.
Just checking.
Sometime after May 21st, Betty and Kathy will have their lives restored to their original luster. So that will really drives this thing, because when the commission met to talk about these goals, one of the things, we have a lot of goals in here that we want to accomplish, but we recognize that if we don't have voter support to deal with things like they're so essential, like our water service, it doesn't make a lot of sense to build a library if we don't have our water service healthy. So that was a big part of the discussion, and they sorted that out, and that's why the water rate rollback was sort of the number one issue. We'll go on to budget highlights, and here we're going to talk some about the different community projects. One thing I'm really proud of is this right-of-way ordinance that the commission has been talking about. Some of you know about the challenges the city and the county had in trying to sort out an agreement for a franchise for the county's dark fiber project. And through that experience, there are essentially two ways to manage rights-of-way and franchise agreements. Oregon City has historically negotiated franchise agreements one at a time with each provider. And that can be pretty time-consuming. In the case with the county, it was extremely time-consuming for them and for us. And so that was a really good segue into maybe there's a better way of doing this. And so about a half a dozen of the cities in the state have adopted a model right-of-way ordinance developed by the League of Oregon Cities. And that ordinance simply codifies all the franchise fees and requirements into a single spot in the municipal code. It publishes what those rates are. It allows us to grandfather in existing agreements that we have with providers. And then for new ones, they simply can go online, look at the municipal code, apply for a license, and pay their fee. And the staff time that we would save on that, well, we haven't actually estimated, but I can tell you it's a significant amount. So we're going to be bringing that back to the commission here in the next month or two to have further discussion, and then we'll start implementing that thereafter. So this shows a little bit of our reserves. We're looking at enhancing the city's revenues not only through that right-of-way ordinance, but we've also budgeted conservatively during the biennium, and we're expecting that right-of-way ordinance could generate hundreds of thousands of dollars for the city, because, as an example, the city doesn't currently charge for right-of-way. I'm sorry, we don't charge for internet service, but virtually everybody in the city probably has internet, so we don't charge a franchise fee right now on internet services. But if we were to do that, it would raise several $100,000. And so the next thing I also want to mention, we're looking at expenditures and processes to find ways to reduce our costs and improve our efficiency. We're also trying to find general fund sources for areas which so we can rely less on reserves. And an example of that would be in our planning department. We provide a lot of general fund support to planning, especially when the building activity more or less ceased to exist 3 years ago, and we had to lay off one of our staff in that department. We want to look at ways we can maybe update our fees that we charge for those services, recognizing that the department does provide a lot of long-range planning that really has very little to do with development at the time. And so there's a lot of benefits to the city from having that department work on those things. So you can't really fund it exclusively with fees, but we do want to look at updating those to make sure they're as current as they need to be. So here we're going to see a closer look at our general fund revenues by source. And here we show an increase in property taxes due to a combination of the tax rate and assessed valuation. We did get some positive news from the assessor that they're expecting our assessed values to go up between 2.5 and 3.5. So we prepared this budget with the lower of those two numbers, while we'll also be hoping for the higher of those two numbers. But we plan conservatively for that. Excluding the increases mentioned above, general fund revenues are relatively flat compared to other prior years. There's been a slight increase in franchise fees, as mentioned before. Court fines are also projected to bring in an additional $200,000 of revenues over the biennium compared to the 2013 budget. That budget was conservative, but the main driving force, I think, here is the police department has recently purchased e-ticket software, which makes the issuance of traffic citations a lot more efficient for us. It also, it does that mainly because the officers can enter the data in the field rather than having court staff turning in their summonses and then having a court staff duplicate that effort. So that's a very efficient move on the part of the police department. Talk a little bit about general fund expenditures by category. Here we notice that personnel costs have increased due to the additional 3 officers in 2014, again assuming the success on the water rate rollback. There's also a risk coordinator in 2015. Their projected COLAs or cost of living increases under our union contracts. There's also the health insurance and the PERS increases. Under materials and services, those have remained relatively stable at $4.7 million each year. These costs include $270,000 for the Willamette Falls Legacy Project. Also, we're seeing some capital outlay increases in 2014. That'd be $235,000 for pool improvements, including a new vacuum and replacement of gutter tiles, sandblasting and painting the pool shell, and the shower and plumbing tile repair. Then there's also $190,000 in maintenance equipment purchases for parks and cemetery. These are equipment pieces like a mower, 2 gators, and a truck, because the equipment we have there now has exceeded its useful life and needs to be replaced. We're also doing some ADA compliance improvements at this building, the Pioneer Center. And then we have transfers increasing slightly due to the right-of-way coordinator position being funded in engineering. That position is going to manage these right-of-way agreements that we have, and we found also through our negotiations with the county on dark fiber that we have people in different divisions of different departments communicating across those department lines, and I think it also contributed to some of the confusion in the beginning when we first had conflict with the county on that installation. So we're going to try to centralize all those people that make those decisions in one department, hopefully prevent that kind of confusion in the future. Yes?
The discussion about the right-of-way and the facility, the franchisee standardization, that's basically the same topic, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
You had commented that there haven't been any estimates made on how much we expect to save with the standardization of the franchisee fees, but we're expecting to fund another position, so you must have some estimates on what kind of savings we could be expecting to realize.
Well, actually, that's a good question, but they're not the same thing. So, for example, when the commission adopts the model right-of-way ordinance, we have a number of people in the right-of-way, entities in the right-of-way, the city of West Lynn, Clackamas River Water, others that are in the right-of-way that don't currently pay any franchise fee. And because they're not what we would call a utility under the terms of our current code. But because they're in the right-of-way, they do owe a franchise. They're just not being charged that right now. So once that gets implemented, there will be additional revenues from that aren't related to efficiencies.
But we still don't have an estimate as to what we hope to be realizing by doing this.
Well, we have an internal estimate, but we haven't published it yet.
Okay.
I can tell you, for example, last year I spent about 25% of my time on franchises. Nancy Ide spent 40% of her time on franchises. So those two positions, right? That much time from both of those positions is, it's getting up there. So where were we? Okay. Let's see. Also, the reduction in contingency here on this slide under expenditures is due to the reduction in general fund reserves. We're funding some of these special projects like the Emmertinger House, for example. We'll be finishing up that project this year. So this is the last year. So that's, the bad news is you see money going out of contingency to fund that. The good news is it's not going to happen again next year and the year after that once we're done with the project. So. And these are general fund expenditures by department. This is pretty typical, actually, for cities in Oregon. You can see that law enforcement is generally the most expensive thing that cities do because it takes a lot of people and a lot of equipment. And it's a 24-hour service. And when you need it, you really need it. Nothing else works. Here we have community services, non-departmental, transfers out. All of these are relatively flat, except here's the use of the contingency I was talking about before. So that's fairly stable across the board.
These graphs are great. Can we get copies of these? Because they're not in our...
The presentation we generally put up on the website as soon as it's concluded, but we don't want to put it up beforehand so people know information like this before you do. since you're the committee, you might want to make changes.
Are you taking questions at this point?
He's-
You were telling me you're taking William's questions.
There's
but-
another one.
But
Go ahead, sir.
I'm just looking at the contingency drop in the next year of the biennium. Is that for a specific reason?
Yes, Wyatt, you want to field that?
In terms of the use of the contingency?
Yeah, and the fact that we don't have that much of a contingency at the end of the biennium.
Correct, Budget Committee member and Mayor Neely. So very specifically, the city is investing in certain projects, Ermitinger House, Blue Heron
Yeah,
project.
those you
and
went through, yeah.
Which are sort of defined as one-time funding as opposed to operations. And we are drawing down reserves to that $600,000 with that in mind. And as the city manager mentioned, we also have some expectation of additional revenues, but we budgeted conservatively. It will behoove us to, throughout the biennial process, to monitor our expenses very carefully and also keep in mind those revenues coming in. This is sort of the worst-case scenario, if you will, for lack of a better term, and where we'll end up at the end. We probably anticipate ending up a little better off than that, and hopefully so. And that's the communication we'll have mid-biennium to sort of update the committee.
For the 2012-13 year, you got the .9. It's down below that. I guess that was my concern, but we have contingency money going to some of those same things that you were talking about.
That's correct. And that .9 is actually a budget figure. We ended up more around the $2 million mark for various reasons. There were a couple of things. We had franchise revenues from PGE came in higher than anticipated. Building department received a lot more permit revenue from doing the work of inspecting buildings and make sure those are up to code, to about $400,000. So we ended up, that .9 million is a budget number. At the end of the year, we ended up at about the $2 million, which is more consistent with the middle number.
Okay.
And this gives me a chance also to mention that our departments are constantly looking for ways to be more efficient. When I mentioned the e-tickets in the police department, there were at least a couple of departments this last year that turned back almost $300,000 that they didn't use because they were able to find efficiencies throughout the year. A couple of places where we had vacancies and it took us longer to fill them than we thought it would. So when Wyatt says we project conservatively, we do on the revenues, but we also look for efficiencies throughout the year. So I've heard before off and on in my career that line that government spends everything you send and then asks for more, but in a situation like this where departments are turning back money at the end of the year, I'm always grateful to see that. So.
And then what do you do with the money that's turned out?
I
Just have to ask.
Sure.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For example, if in the, for example, the right-of-way coordinator, we wouldn't fill that position until the city manager felt comfortable that we had the reduction of expense and revenues to pay for it. That's one example, and that would result in some unspent budget, if you will. Another example is in the finance department, we're discussing whether we will outsource the utility billing function, sending out the bills, and we might save some money from that. So I have to budget to be able to operate, but if we can spend less than that, there'll be a little bit left over. That money will just end up into the reserves or the ending balance, which then we can rebudget at this time the next
So it goes
biennium.
into the general fund, kind of?
Or into each individual fund in a
Yeah.
reserve component, yeah.
Okay, got it.
Thank you. So now we're going to get more specific about the funds. Here is, we're anticipating revenues of $3.7 million in state gas taxes and $3.7 million in pavement maintenance fees, also $1 million in development charges. And so the funding is this there's also $300,000 in there for building reserves for the construction of an eventual Public Works Operations Center. And we're in the process with the City Commission of looking for a site in which to do that. We have a couple of under consideration, but since they're executive session, I can't really talk to you about the details, but this commission is looking for those sites. I'll talk a little bit about street funds. State gas taxes make up 28% of funding for all of our street funds. It shows a slight increase of about 2% or $50,000 over previous years. We also have grants decreasing by more than $8 million due to the completion of the jug handle project. And then we have charges for services. These are our pavement maintenance, utility fee, and STCs. That makes up about 37% of funding. Those are projected to increase by $130,000 in 2014 and another $100,000 in 2015. The PMUF pavement maintenance utility fee rate increase is tied to the CPI, which is projected at around 3%. And then SDC revenues are projected to increase slightly due to improved building activity. Can't quite see the bottom line on this, can you?
That's what it's all about, baby. Bottom line, $132 million.
That's what the committee's worth. You can find that bottom line. So this one shows the expenditures by category. It shows you what we do with the money that we collect for streets. The development contract services for street account for an increase in contract services for some. I'm going to just list some projects here. First is the Transportation System Development Charge Study, consistent with a recently completed system plan update. It's what we call the TSP, and the Commission has had some information on that presented to you at your last work session. Also, we have a concept level designs for corridors, which include Division Street, Pease Road, Myers Road, Malala Avenue Phase 3, and Partlow Road. And then last but not least, we're seeking more than $1 million in federal funding for OR 213 and Redland Road improvements. I believe that was the STIP process, wasn't it? The STIP process, which stands for State Transportation Improvement Plan, and in our case stood for not being successful this year, but we're going to keep trying because it's a big project with a big price tag. I think part of it was that Oregon City got a lot of attention from the jug handle, and we did a really good job with that project, but it's hard to get that big of a lion's share of that funding, right on the heels of finishing the jug handle. So it's really somebody else's turn for a while, and then Oregon City will eventually get this money, is my hope. So while we're focusing on roadway improvements, there appears to be a reduction due to completion of the jug handle, and that's what you see on the slide here. Capital outlay is still 48% of street funds expenditures. So in our water funds, this is we budgeted this assuming that the rollback goes away and we don't have to deal with that anymore and roll our rates back. If we do, it's 27% or $3 million of revenue from the water fund. We do have some water reserves, so we could operate a while if that happened, but we wouldn't be solvent for very long if that occurs.
I think it wouldn't be a problem if everybody voted yes on May 21st.
Thank you, Betty.
You're welcome. Just trying to be helpful.
Yes.
We could have somewhat less than everybody, though, vote on it.
Yes.
To still be successful.
I'm not being silent for a reason. I am being silent for a reason that since I'm an employee, I can't advocate for or against the measure, but your elected officials can certainly do that. So moving on. This shows water fund revenues by source. And here you can see that the water funds are funded by charges for services. These are utility bills, SDC's pumping charges. Utility bills make up the bulk of revenues at over $5 million each year. The proposed budget includes 3% rate increases per each year of the biennium as authorized by the City Commission. The budget assumes that rates will not be set back again to 94 levels. So these are the expenditures. The costs in the water funds have remained fairly constant throughout. Personnel and materials increases are due mainly to the CPI, the health insurance, and PERS for personnel, also fuel costs and contracts for maintenance and services. Then our wholesale water purchase totals a little over $3 million for the biennium. That's not really a significant increase over prior years. Some of the major projects that are being proposed during the biennium include the Claremont Way water line, which is about $400,000, Main Street pipe replacement, which is $200,000, and then pipe capacity upgrades and system expansions are also budgeted at approximately $800,000. Obviously, some of those projects may not get done if the ballot measure isn't successful.
I might say nothing.
So we also have transfers to building reserves of $400,000. Moving on to the wastewater funds, it's self-explanatory here. I think this slide's fairly short. One thing that Mayor Neely and I had our first of what I think will be many lunch meetings today with Clackamas County Chair John Ludlow. We recently agreed that after the dark fiber negotiations were completed, that it would be helpful for our entity and their entity to have folks get together once in a while before there's a crisis and talk about how we can solve problems together. So we covered lots of things, everything from library and downtown parking to this question, and that is how Tri-City bills, how those billings come to the city. Most of you who get a city utility bill in the past have seen a charge on there for city water and sewer, but the sewer treatment isn't broken out from the bill. So our utility billing folks at City Hall get the phone calls when Wes increases the rates. And we had a real candid discussion today with the chair about that, and he encouraged us to do something we've already decided to do, which was start separating those out so people can hold us accountable and know who to call, and also hold them accountable and know who to call when those increases occur. So dealing with wastewater funds, we have here charges for services in the wastewater funds include 80 cent per dwelling unit increase in 2014 and a CPI-related increase of 3% in 2015. And this represents an increase of a little less than $10 per year for the average Oregon City resident. And in the wastewater funds, the cost in wastewater funds increased for personnel and COLA and PERS. Also, the Tri-City sewer rate increase is about 10% this year. We have asked, and I'll be meeting with some staff from Water Environment Services at the county, because one of our concerns is that they have these increases coming out the same time our voters are weighing in on whether or not to remove the rollback from the charter. Now, we all know that one is wastewater and one is water, but we're not sure if voters might be confused about that. So we've suggested to Clackamas County that they forego implementing that rate increase until January 1st, which would give us time to not only deal with the water rate rollback, but potentially also fund replacement of the pipes in our water system as well. We want voters to have two cracks at that, if you will, before they see rate increases on their sewer bills. We also mentioned that today to Chair Ludlow, and it's a process. I can't tell you what the outcome is or even whether I'm optimistic, but we are making that effort. I wanted you to be aware of that. This also includes capital projects for completion of the Barclay Hills Pump Station at $345,000 and Main Street pipe replacements of $250,000. And in this account, there's a transfer to building reserves of $300,000 per year.
Before you turn that page, I think on your previous page you used an acronym, CPI.
Yeah, Consumer Price Index.
Oh, that one, okay, because in here it also talks about CIP.
Oh, that's a capital improvements plan. I'm sorry for the jargon, William.
Okay.
That's a good catch.
Thank you.
Yeah, CIP
They
is.
just do it from the back of their hands. They know it. We don't. Yeah.
Any other question on that? Okay. So moving on to stormwater funds. This is, I think, one of those areas where cities never seem to have enough funding to provide for all the stormwater needs. We do have a small increase scheduled of 25 cents per dwelling unit rate increase. And we're going to be completing a citywide surface water management master plan. And with that will come a 5-year capital improvement program in this biennium. We have about 7.5 miles of video inspections and assessments and $250,000 in annual transfers to building reserves. So stormwater funds, this is the revenues for stormwater. Charges for services include a 25% dwelling unit increase. That's, again, the cost of living authorized by the Commission. It results in additional revenues of about $300,000 over both years, combined both years. And the stormwater funds expenditures, these are the same increases here for personnel, COLA, health, and PERS. Also a transfer to building reserves of $250,000 a year. It funds some upgrades to storm projects, but funding is lower than needed. We have Coffee Creek Culvert, Cathaway Court storm reroute, Willamette Street storm replacements, and Main Street stormwater pipe replacements that aren't budgeted due to insufficient funding. So we're going to be seeking probably some grants, and we'll be looking at our master plan funding ideas to try to eventually construct those projects. And then we're going to try to develop a citywide stormwater master plan with a 5-year capital improvement plan tied to that the commission will be reviewing. So here we mentioned these pass-through monies. This again is the construction excise tax that we collect for the school district every year. I'm not going to read this slide to you, but you can see there that we're keeping the commitments that the commission has made, and also we're getting money from our partners like Clackamas County and Metro for the Blue Heron Project, Willamette Falls Legacy Project, I mean. And then our library down here is funded with $3.5 million in district property taxes. I know there's some debate. This is one of the things we talked with Chair Ludlow today about, was the need for cities that rely on library network funding to make sure that funding commitment is kept so that we can keep our commitment to provide the service levels to our citizens that they expect. And the city is currently looking, if you look at your goals, you'll see that one of our top priorities is also to settle on a site for our library. And here we have some budget highlights for major capital improvement projects, and we just listed them out there so that they would be easy for you to find. And hopefully after we get these done, we'll have pretty pictures for you like we do in the back of the presentation. This is quite a bit of capital work for a city that's coming out of a recession period. And that's mostly because we have the capacity to do that through our, because we have lower staff than many cities our size. And then these are some additional, these are more major projects that are important, I think, to folks. I'll give you a minute to look at those. Coming to a neighborhood near you, perhaps. And then we budget our cost of living increases in a range of 2 to 3%. We, again, have a tentative agreement with our police department of a 3.22. We're currently negotiating with AFSCME, which is a pretty good-sized bargaining unit in the city. It's one of 2 bargaining units. And then here are the increases in insurance this year. We had been expecting more, something in the neighborhood of 10 to 12%, so this was good news for us. I'd like to see that trend continue until that's down to the
And that's been verified?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, your budget is based on those
Yes.
5%, 5%, 0%?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So here we even though we will be budgeting biannually from now on, we do plan to issue a midterm budget report in off years so that committee members know where we are. This written report will not include a formal meeting, so we can save some of that 800 hours in staff time we talked about at the beginning of the night. But it will allow the committee to see what the expenditures are and how we're tracking, and to ask any questions that you might have in midterm, because we recognize that it's a good time for us to check in too at the end of a year, especially as there may come a time when we're so accustomed to a biennial budget that we feel comfortable with it, but the staff and I all want to make sure that the estimates that we've made and the contingency that we have is adequate. And if we start to see larger budget adjustments necessary, then we might have to take another look at that. But checking in on an annual basis, I think, will help us stay on track. And then before we get into the questions and deliberation section, we used to, in another city I managed, we used to put our budget committee members and some of our key staff on a bus, literally, and drive them around and physically show them projects that they had budgeted the prior year so they could see that they got built and done. And this is a little bit larger city, and we have a lot more people on the committee and more projects, so we decided to at least give you some pictures of some of the things that have happened.
Virtual bus tour.
This was a really big one. A lot of people don't know, I think, that the construction of this was about $10.6 million to rebuild this bridge, and 89.7% of that money came from federal funds, and 10.3% of it came from state funds.
How close was that to budget, to being on budget? How close was that to being on budget?
I'm not sure what ODOT's budget was. I think it was right on target.
Yeah, it's very close.
Yeah. I'd like to say that, like they say, no animals were harmed in the production of this movie. I'd like to say no city funds were spent in the revitalization of this intersection, but actually they were. If you look at this pole and some of the cruddy stuff that's around there, we've replaced a lot of that with these streamlined mast arms. We've done work here. There was enormous amounts of what I call sign clutter. Nancy Krushauer and I walked around there with Jason Tell one day from ODOT, and ODOT was a great partner in that. They let us basically do everything we could to beautify that intersection, recognize the constraints of these buildings, and the old footprint when this roadway was designed. I think Model A had a width of about half what this thing has, so you can imagine it's just a different roadway. Also, you can see some of the old obelisks. There's one of these that's down. I'm just going to point past William like you were walking downtown, and right about here, you would see that obelisk there. And Main Street Oregon City was instrumental in getting that monument installed on the corner. And we've been getting, when the commission started that pavement management utility fee, I think there was some rancor because people didn't actually think we were going to produce results with that program. But that program has really been helpful, and it's really one of those things, you collect the money and you literally put it down on the pavement here. And we're starting to get lots of citizens noticing these improved streets. We have a lot more to do, but I'm really glad that we're on top of this. And a few more years of this PMUF, and we're going to have a city that has probably comparatively better streets than a lot of our neighboring cities that have more resources. So, yes?
Do we bid that out every year, or is it the same contractor that does that service?
That's a great question. John?
We bid it out every year. Every year, so it could be a different contractor.
Yes. Yeah. Good question. Yes.
When the city implemented the PMUF strategy, it was ramped up so that it wasn't such an immediate burden on the citizens,
Right.
Which I thought was a very smart move. I think, have we maxed that out now? So
Yes.
Right.
so we will not be increasing that PMUF.
Only by the cost of living.
Only
I
by-
think there's inflationary adjustments in the PMUF, but there won't be the big stair step. It's at the maximum rate,
Okay.
notwithstanding inflation.
And we imagine that's going to be sustained for the foreseeable future, that our streets will never be in such a condition that we will ever be able to decrease that, because that is what we really need to maintain them.
Yeah, and of course, this pavement maintenance doesn't totally take the place of reconstruction.
Of course.
The idea is to do enough of this work so that you don't lose your road base and your bed and have to really, literally reconstruct a street. We'll still need capital money for those kinds of things that you'll see in our TSP. But this should allow us to do the maintenance we need to get the best value out of those streets. John?
Well, if you remember, when we passed that, there was an annual report requirement, and then 5 years, which is really coming due, we're supposed to reevaluate that fee and look at how we're doing and report back. But in this budget, we're definitely, we're set with regard to the budget. So,
Yeah. Good question.
Whether we see it go down or not, I don't know, but we're moving real well with that.
And kudos to them for continuing to come back with their annual reports, which was part of the deal when
Absolutely.
we set this PMUF up.
Right.
Yeah, doing a good
great.
job on that.
Thank you. So the transportation system plan, those of you who have followed this and been to some of the open houses, the importance of that project is really, it's about decisions, about whether you're going to grow and to what extent you can fund certain projects. We have come to the realization that ODOT simply doesn't have enough money for us to build our way out of our transportation challenges. So this really is a compromise document that reflects the values of Oregon City. It hasn't been officially adopted yet by the commission, but it's coming to a close here soon. And then Main Street. Gosh, there's the old obelisk right there that I was just talking about. So this project, of course, was finished this year, and we're really proud of that, pleased that fills in gaps for replacing ADA deficient crumbling sidewalks, curbs, and ramps at crossings. We also installed bicycle parking and street furnishings and street trees to increase the urban tree canopy. We added some disabled I don't know, what we call that now. What do you call those spaces for people who have disabilities? Thank you.
Handicap.
That's what we call them today. I can't keep up because it's not politically correct one week and then they change it the next week. But we did install more of those, and I think,
Before and after are different.
Two different.
I know.
Yeah,
I know. I apologize for that. The before and after should be the same. Yeah. I know.
David, it worked. They are paying attention.
Yay. We passed the test.
This one is the same. And basically, we had a real bottleneck here that we don't have nearly as bad a bottleneck here. We got this by building, you see the retaining wall that we had to install right along here. And this allowed us to put in a new turn lane. And then you see this signage here, we have 2 straight-through pass-through lanes, which really increases the capacity of that intersection to deal with that bottleneck. And Pearl Street, construction is underway at Pearl Street between Malala and Lynn Avenues. Roadway was identified as needing an overlay and as one of 3 special projects in the Transportation Master Plan due to the steepness of the roadway just west of Myrtle Street, as well as the narrowness of this section of roadway. Construction includes the building of a new retaining wall, widening the roadway, replacing guardrails, and improving mobility and safety. And that project should be completed by the end of May.
Oh, nice.
And then, these are your arteries. No, this is your water pipes.
Could be mine.
Someone drank out of that.
Post-omelet artery. But this shows what happens in some of our older corroded pipes. And really what this does is it reduces the flow through this pipe, increases pressures. It causes us to have many more water main breaks, which are extremely expensive. So this water pipe replacement program is something the city desperately needs. The water division is looking at a comprehensive leak detection survey and pinpointing a project to cover the city's water distribution system of approximately 151 miles of pipelines. They replaced 225 feet of pipe along Brighton Avenue between Ogden Drive and McKinley Avenue, and another 850 feet of water main along Brighton Avenue between Summit Street and Jersey Avenue. And we're going to start scheduling over 2,400 feet of water system line replacement during the next 2 years.
Excuse me, do you mind if I ask questions directly, or do you want me to go through you?
I think we're going to let it go this time, but I have my eye on it.
Yeah, you better be watching that booth, dude.
Mr. Manager, I noticed somewhere in the budget document it talks about the number of miles that are being inspected for leaks, like we've done 1/3. I'm really impressed with that. The fact that and I imagine that will be an ongoing inspection type of thing.
Right.
So I'm wondering, in inspecting for leaks, I'm assuming that you find them. That's why we do, colonoscopies to make sure we found the right things there. I guess that would be for
Great
sewer
comparison.
more than. In any event, what I'm wondering is, when you find those leaks and repair them, obviously, there's some savings involved. So I'm assuming that we are losing less water. There's also been I'm assuming that that we would be losing less water once we fix the leaks. I don't know if that's ever been quantified, or are we doing this just because it's a good thing to do?
Yeah, William, I don't think that we are right now, because our pipe, we have at least 50 miles of that pipe. Some of it's 100 years old.
Right.
So when you fix one, because of the age of the system, you probably getting holes in these pipes and leaks is about as fast as you're fixing them right now, because we don't have a pipe replacement program that's aggressive enough to really get a hold on this. And until we do that, I don't think you're going to see quantifiable savings. But I do think that that's a good point, because I think the amount of treated water that escapes from the system, we can quantify that. And assuming that we get a handle on that through our pipe replacement program, it could be a significant amount of money. I can't tell you off the top of my head what it's estimated at.
And the issue has been raised, not too excessively, I think, but the issue has been raised, particularly by Mr. Edgar, about how much leakage is coming from some of our reservoirs. And I'm wondering if there's some way of tying any of that together, so that we are basically not losing water that we've already paid for.
I don't think we're leaking from our reservoirs, but John?
Yeah. William, Paul brings that up regularly, and we've taken that on regularly. actually.
Great.
The reservoirs that we were talking about, we only have a few reservoirs, our big reservoir up on Mountain View.
Right.
And there's an under drainage system under that thing. In the summertime, it's dry as a bone. So that's the best way we have to tell whether or not that system leaks or not. And so it's our opinion that we don't have leaks in our reservoir.
Great. That's good news. Thank you.
Thank you. There's another question.
So based upon the rate, based upon the rate that we're replacing old pipe today, if we can only continue that pace, how long will it take to replace all this old pipe?
Well, we propose replacing 2 miles
Yes.
of pipe a year.
Right.
We've got 154 miles, so 75 years essentially.
And then it'll be time to
By
start
that time, the
replacing.
price will get old.
Thank you. So we'll change the quality of water to a different kind. And here we have some examples of wastewater division conducting annual system-wide cleaning programs and inspections. Just for edification, we have 136 miles of gravity and forced main sanitary sewer lines in the city. So just a little bit less than our water system. This is another example of a paving project on division. Each year, the Streets Department, or Streets Division rather, identifies roadways in need of significant repair and reconstruction work. This one is an example of 15 roadway segments which were reconstructed or overlaid in 2013. Division Street between 7th and 15th Streets had its existing asphalt milled and was repaved. And that's what this is a picture of.
And anybody in an ambulance going down to the hospital appreciates it.
Yeah. But that's the expensive way of doing it.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's why we do maintenance.
Yeah. It's great.
And this is a small one, but gosh, all of us probably remember as kids running up and down stairs like this with pooling water. They have the little strips that are supposed to keep you from sliding, but they're not nearly as effective as this stuff. And if you have kids that use a pool, you appreciate these kind of safety features. And this is a before and after picture of the actual boiler at the pool.
Oh my gosh, look it up here.
Yeah.
Compared to
One of
now.
them is smaller than the other, and you might be surprised, but it's much, much more efficient on fuel than the one. This is the new one. This is the old one.
Can I just take a moment, if I may? I want to compliment the Parks and Recreation staff, because years ago when I came on the commission, they said, well, we have to replace that facility. We've got to get a new facility, and they've demonstrated that we can be economical, we can make the improvements. There's still improvements to be made, but I think they've done a very great job on our pool facility, and I just wanted to acknowledge that.
So I've talked about some of the things that we've accomplished. I want to talk now about things that are coming. And when I say coming soon, the first one is really the giant one. I think that is a game changer for our entire community and the region. And it's what you'll continually hear me refer to as an opportunity for international achievement. And that's the beginning of a new day, really, for Oregon City. So I want to talk a little bit. This is the Willamette Falls Legacy Project. It's the site total is 23 acres, and I don't think you can see it very well, but if you think about the railroad tracks going up this way on the river, there's a sliver of land that goes up several hundred yards up the river, and it's wide enough for a trail, but it's not wide enough for a building of any kind. But while the site is 23 acres, significant portions of it are in the floodplain, so what you put there might have to be, there is such a thing as viewing platforms and things like that that could be installed there that would probably be okay being underwater once or twice a decade. Most of the site, in fact, has been underwater at some point in the city's history, but there's about 16 or 17 acres of it that's actually buildable. There's a little over 500,000 square feet of building space on that site. And so it's a major undertaking to take some of the structures out and ready the site for redevelopment. There are also some very unique and I would say worthwhile older buildings there that have timber peg construction and dramatic architectural features, large, really big windows and high ceilings, things that just scream out for some sort of reuse, adaptive reuse of the structures. So there are a number of buildings like that on the site. We are right now on this project about a year ahead of where I thought it was possible for us to be. 2.5 years ago when we started talking about this. And keep in mind that that means we're probably 2 years ahead of where some other people thought we would be, because I'm the optimist. I'm always thinking we started talking about this thing as a 10-year project, and here we are now. It's a top priority for our congressman. We've had a delegation of city commission members and staff going to D.C. to talk to officials about funding. We have letters from Washington County, and we're working on other letters from around the region with our partners from Metro and the county to redevelop this site. And we have essentially 4 components that we are focused on that got us as far as we are right now, and those are public access, economic revitalization, cultural and historic interpretation, and environmental restoration on the site. So very shortly we will be kicking off a major planning effort to develop a region-wide vision for this site, and we're hoping for as much participation as possible from all over. But we really want Oregon City's voice to be heard on this, and for the public to bring us their ideas for redevelopment of the site. I'm really excited about improving the tax base and the job creation that can take place on that site, because I think it's significant. And I'll give you another look at it. Those of you who've been on our almost 30 different tours now that we've taken, we've also done a couple of jet boat rentals where we brought people up the river to the falls in a jet boat. But the typical path is down here along this little Z-shaped thing right here. And then when you get about right here, depending on the flow on the river, you start to get wet from the mist. And then when you get over here, I call this, I don't know what you call that, a wetting platform, a tennis court, I don't know. But it's up off the air, and right here are the falls, right here. You can't really see them in this picture, but you cannot stand there and not be stunned by what you see that nature has created. So, and this thing is a clarifier, although when you look at that water, I'm not sure about the name. But we're not sure either what that would be used for at some point. But all of that is part of the master planning process to try to determine whether, for example, that there would be an esplanade right along here, a walkway maybe. There are tail races that run underneath this site where water naturally flows through. There's a potential to daylight 1 or 2 of those and have natural salmon runs restored up the falls. I mean, there's just any number of things. There's, I've heard people talk about hotels and rail stops in here. Somebody even talked about a zip line across the falls somewhere. That was me in one of my crazier days, but nonetheless, if they put it in there, I'm going to write it. And then we do have a planning document that has some alley improvements. We've done so much in our downtown that there are places now where these things, it's funny because the more you improve your downtown, the more things that you didn't fix start to show up. Commissioner Smith is, with the artistic eye that he has pointed that out to me a few times, and I think here we have an example of something we could do better. And there's another concept on the next slide. I like this one even better because I think it's more stark when you see the differences here, what could be done. And it also helps our downtown be much more pedestrian friendly, bike friendly. There it is, the Ermitinger. We didn't think we were ever going to get done with this, but we are going to get done with it in the biennium. So we've had a lot of help from our partners, and we have a community development block grant of over $150,000 or right around that amount to finish this. This is an example of some of the settling there on the site. And essentially what's wrong is that this site under here is not built on stable fill. There's some fill under the house that has that and the age of the house collectively have caused it to be unstable, and we had to close it for a while. But we're getting close to having enough funds collected to actually do this restoration the right way from the ground up. And this is a Barclay Hills pump station. The Barclay Hills pump station currently serves 172 houses and 2 multifamily apartment complexes with a total of 220 units, pumping sewage from approximately 100 feet, up 150 feet of elevation rather. The pump station had a major control system failure in 2011. I think some of the commissioners probably remember that event. Although the control system was upgraded after the failure, the study documented a number of other deficiencies. This city-funded project proposes to upgrade the existing Barclay Hills pump station with replacement pumps and motors and a new covered utility shelter to house the pump station controls. It also includes an emergency overflow pipe and a bypass pumping connection on the force main, a new water service, and related site improvements. And this connection will allow the city to quickly install a backup pump in case of future equipment failures, which I think are really important. So again, the design, contract documents, and land use planning for Barclay Hills Pump Station improvement project should be completed over the coming year.
If I may, I have a hard time visualizing what an overflow at a sewer pump station, what might happen to that overflow.
John?
They didn't
probably
even
tell you.
realize it.
Where would the overflow go?
Well, it did.
It usually goes to a surface water system, unfortunately.
Okay.
But now they require that there will be alarms, and that way we can automatically tell you how many gallons and when it's happening before you see a pipe, and lots of times it will overflow for a longer period of time.
I know that.
It usually runs downhill, Your Honor. No. I couldn't resist, I'm sorry. These are some of the pool improvements that we were talking about earlier. My understanding of this project is there's only so many, most of us who have older houses would know, there's only so many coats of paint you can put on something before you need to strip it off and start over. And I believe that's where we are with this project. We've done all we can with new paint, and it's time to strip it down, sandblast it, and start with a fresh base. So that's part of what's planned at the pool. And now we're ready for questions and your deliberations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So I believe this brings us to item 8, budget review, questions, and public comment. And so I will give the floor to the finance director.
Thank you, Chair. So the budget review process involves discussion and questions on the proposed document. We've set up a comments table for citizens to comment and for department directors to answer specific questions to their departments. Before we get started, I'd like to ask Maria to hand out one quick numbers correction in the budget document. And if the committee members could turn to page 32, which is under the Policy and Administration tab in their budget document. And page 32 says Legal up in the top left corner. If you open your 3-ring binder, which is very efficient this year, and take out page 32, this replacement page will go in. Of course, with the new budget document, you can imagine there's probably typos and things throughout, but this numbers change we wanted to make sure was corrected. It entails the 2013 budget numbers, which just pulled the wrong way from the spreadsheet.
I have a few questions about that one.
And I can see a commissioner already had some big circles around that one, so you can hold on to that page if you want. So essentially, we're replacing page 32, 31, and 32 of the budget document. And I'll give you a second to do that.
Sure. Mr. Chairman?
Do I have a motion for a break?
No. You might have a motion if you don't.
All right, let's keep pushing along, but I may try to push things along a little bit, so look for me for questions, and I'll try to call along. I don't know your names very well, but you do seem to have very nice name tags out front of you, which should help things a little bit.
Thank you, Katie.
And before I move to Wyatt, I know David had an answer to one of William's questions from earlier, so if you would answer that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Committee member Gifford asked how much savings we would have from the implementation of the council's right-of-way management ordinance. And the projected total revenue at our current rates would be about $129,445 a year. That's our internal estimate that I told you wasn't official yet.
125 what?
$129,445. And then we also are expecting an average 5-year annual savings of $31,780, and those are mostly from legal costs and staff costs over the 5 years. The 5-year total is $158,000, which averages out to about $31,780 per year. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. At this point, I will move forward with item 8. Wyatt.
Thank you, Chairman. So as I mentioned, we have the table there for public comment and also for department heads to come up for detailed questions or answers to questions if needed. The budget is organized by department for easy review, and of course the committee can review in any form that they want, but we might just take it department by department. And then I would turn it back over to the chair to open up the public hearing that's required under Oregon budget law.
So I need a motion for public hearing on proposed budget.
So,
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We are now open for discussion, and I believe we're going to start with public comment, if I'm not mistaken. Do we have any public comment? Nancy? Oh, I have no vote. I have no vote. So I need all those in favor.
aye.
There we go. Now,
See, opposed never get to do anything under you.
so are we ready for public comments? Do we have public comment? Sir, welcome.
Can I stand here?
Nope.
We need you
Use the
at
mic.
front at the mic, unfortunately.
We need to record your gorgeous voice.
So I will remind you, you have 3 minutes. You have a fancy little box there in front of you that will tell you when your 3 minutes are.
No.
Nope, it's all magic, I swear. And if you could give us your name and what area you're from.
My name is Bob Mahoney. I live in Oregon City, and I just want to congratulate everybody on what I consider to be just a really good budget committee and a great budget. Get ready because the train is about to leave the station, and we're all going to get on it. It's going to be a real interesting ride. The next 10 years in this community are going to be an adventure that I don't think none of us are going to forget. We've got the Blue Heron site in our sights, so to speak. Not to over-dramatize it, but to over-dramatize it. This piece of property doesn't belong to Oregon City. It doesn't belong to Oregon. It belongs to history. And shame on us if we don't take full advantage of that. There are people that got on wagons, risked their lives, fought disease, fought off violence, starvation, and what have you, to get here. I think it's up to us to pay tribute to those people. I'm in full, agreement with private enterprise being a part of this. But we ought to pay tribute to the pioneers that got us to where we are. If I was king for a day, and I hope he forgives me, Bill Gates, I'd buy the property, give it to the public. That's how strongly I feel about this. But I'm supposed to keep an open mind. I know I keep an open mouth. But anyway, I want to invite you all to come along on this adventure and send our thoughts, prayers, and efforts right back that way along the Oregon Trail. Because, folks, this thing is a legacy. It's international in scope. It's going to be the Mount Rushmore of the West. It's going to revitalize that downtown like you've never seen before. People interested in history of this country are going to come here to see what we've done in tribute to them. If I had the money, I'd hire her myself. I had all this money all lined up, and then this sequester came along and wiped it out.
Darn it, Bob.
Well, it was a short list, and I was on the bottom. But I think I'm just telling you what I think everybody knows in their heart. So let's plan this thing with our heart, and there'll be money involved in that. And I think I've just been sequestered. So anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bob. Great comment.
Thank you, sir. And I would be remiss if you could fill out a comment form and hand it back to me. Now that you've already given your comment, if you could fill out the form just so we have that for official record.
Oh, and I just wanted to say I support the police department completely. They've got guns and I don't.
That's a good point.
All right. Thank you, sir. Do we have other public comments? appears we do not. So I believe at this point I can open it up to the commission for comment. One thing that White was asking me to remind you all, it would be easiest if we went through and organized the questions by fund as we went through.
By department section?
By department section, I'm sorry. So if you happen to have your questions organized in your brain that way, that would be super. If not, we'll just roll with the punches and go from there. So do we have a opening question or comment? Yes, sir.
I do. I have actually 3 questions, and I want to thank Autumn for the idea of a break, because I went around and asked my questions to different department managers, so I don't have to take up time anymore. That's got pretty well. First of all, Mr. Parno and Mr. Frazier, thank you very much. I think the budget document is certainly conservative, and I think, once again, it's very balanced. I think it's a very responsible budget for the biennium, and I know it represents a lot of work on everybody's part for the city, so I appreciate that. I think it's a really good looking document this year, so thank you. I just have 3 quick questions, and I believe they're all going to be for the 2 of you from the administration. I'm not going to go through the various departments, but first of all, the PERS differential fund that you spoke of, and it may put Mr. Parno on the spot because I don't think he has the history, but if we could chart that out in a bar graph or a line graph, well, my first question is, how much is that this year or for the biennium? And if we could chart that out and look at it over the last 5 years, what are we doing with that? And is that money being held in an account, or obviously we're carrying it over every year? And how much are we budgeting of an increase every year, and how much have we over the last 5 years?
Thank you, Commission Member. The PERS rate differential fund is a fund, and it's found on page 136 of the budget document. You can see some history there. So essentially, that fund was created when the city issued bonds to finance some of the portion of the outstanding liability for PERS. That was a good move at the time because we were able to lock in rates at that time and save ultimately on the cost of the pension. One of the things that Oregon City did at the time that was unique, the leaders then, decided to continue to charge the same amount for PERS that they would otherwise had they not issued bonds. And they put the difference into this fund. So this fund pays the bonds off, and it also accumulates money to sort of offset the highs and lows for the PERS rate. So, for example, in this current biennium, there was a rate increase of 5% from the PERS board. The impact on our operating budget is going to be half of that, 2.5%, because we had some of this reserve set up. At the end of the biennium, we still plan to have, you can see the farthest right column, the contingency line will be $1.6 million approximately at the end of the biennium, even though we're using half of the funds to offset some of that rate increase.
Okay, excellent. I'm sorry, I didn't see that page 136. Okay, thank you. Mr. Frazier, you referenced a risk coordinator, but I don't know what department that's for, and we didn't really talk about what he does and what is that a 1.0 FTE? Is it a
Yes,
half?
that's one person. That would be assigned in the city recorder's office. And some of it, I'll just run over a summary of what that person in that position would be doing. Would be processing insurance claims, working with our insurance carrier to reduce liabilities for the city. Also contract analysis and administration, OSHA compliance, and arranging safety and risk training to all of our departments.
Okay, who does that now?
It's really split between our single HR director, and he has an assistant, so that's a 2-person department, and the city recorder. And both of those positions, by the way, the pay grade for those positions is much higher than this one that we're proposing. So that would free up time for them to...
What would that person make per year?
I don't think we've established a salary. We do have positions that are similar from other cities that we're collecting, but because we're only estimating what the pay range is, and the HR might be able to tell you if you want to.
So what are we?
I haven't decided yet, so I still need a firm job description.
Okay.
Before we
All right. It would be less than the revenues we're generating. I can guarantee that.
So how can we budget for it if we don't know what the number's going to be?
We do have a budget for it.
I think Nancy has an estimate. Do you have an estimate for the salary?
If you look right here, it's right here.
If I could recommend, thank you for the question, Budget Committee member. And on page 143 is a listing of all the personnel by department and the salary ranges. And in the city recorder's office, we have the risk and contract coordinator at a range of $4,600 to $6,400 a month. And of course, that position hasn't been offered, but that was what was used in the budget document.
And you said other cities our size, with our budget, with our employees, have this person?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, cool. Last question regards the ending fund.
Could I just add just a couple comments to that? The items that the city manager mentioned that this position would be responsible for, we pretty much aren't doing a lot of these things because we don't have the staff to do it. For instance, the contract analysis and management, there's no contract specialist in the city at all. Department heads basically do it because they learned on the job. We have to contact our city attorney to give us input and pay an expensive attorney for that information rather than having an on-staff contract person that can help with those things. I'm not going to go into all the details right now, but we don't have an actual salary range yet. It's still to be determined, but there's a lot more that if we had the risk manager, they would basically end up paying for themselves because of the savings that would come through the management of the risk. So I just wanted to add those few comments.
Thanks, Nancy. I appreciate it.
Could I ask a question on that subject? What is the, how many risk assessments are requested every year by employees?
Well, by employees, it's just a matter of assessing risk related to, let's say that there's issues in, let's just say that there's accidents in a particular department.
Right. Well, what was the last one that you've done? And then I
don't really do any risk assessment.
Okay.
It's on a reactive basis. You know,
Right.
if something needs to be done, then we'll contact our city attorney's office or our insurance agent, and ask for advice on those areas. So there's really no one in the city with that expertise. So it's an area that's greatly in need.
So is it a accident prevention specialist, or is it to look at our liability from civil torts or things like that? From
Should be
It's
both.
both.
Should be
Okay.
both, yeah.
Right.
Okay. All right, cool. Last question regarding the ending fund balance. I thought I read somewhere in there that the ending fund balance, if I remember right, is the money left over that we didn't spend that we're going to use to pay the bills until between July and when those are received in November. And that percentage is about 15% of, or what is it?
Correct,
exactly?
15 to 25%.
15 to 25%.
But 15%.
Okay, and so obviously you're comfortable with that.
We're comfortable with that. We will be monitoring expenses throughout the biennium
Because of the
because of the ending fund balance that we have projected doesn't quite get us to November, but we do anticipate that there will be some departments that return funds back, and we hope that additional revenues will come through. If that turns out to not be the case, we would bring to the commission adjustments to the budget or just not spend the funds.
Would we ever borrow money? Would we ever do a tax anticipation loan from a?
It's certainly possible to do a tax anticipation loan or borrow within the city from ourselves is the cheaper route to do that.
Have we ever done that?
I don't have the history, but
Yes, we have. Yes, we have.
Oh, the South.
That's the most recent.
Well, and urban renewal.
So I think, yes.
So
I
we
think
have.
So I think the question was, have we done short-term borrowing to get us from July to November in the recent years? And I haven't seen any in the last 3 years of the budget or probably in a couple of the financial reports that I've looked at, but we might have done that in the past as well.
It's been a long time, though.
Yeah.
And then we talked about kind of a snapshot or a report card next year. And is the, and I think Mr. Gifford has a question, I'm sorry, I don't remember what the answer was. Are we going to meet so that we can look at how we're doing, since we've never done it before, and look at expenditures and revenues and see where we're at about 12 months from now or in July?
We're not anticipating another meeting of the committee. We're anticipating sending out this report.
Okay.
first, and we think we can address the questions that way. But if there's a need, of course, for the committee to assemble, we would do that, but we don't anticipate it.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mayor.
One item that was discussed at the goal-setting session but didn't, and I missed it, didn't make the list, was that generally we're supposed to review and update our comp plan every 10 years. This would be the biennium in which it would occur. This would be the community question to the community development portion. So that's my query, the comprehensive plan review.
Additional questions, comments?
Well,
that's my question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What will be the status? What will be the status of the comprehensive plan review that's normally done on a 10-year basis?
Oh, there we go. And if you would state your name, I'm sorry, I don't know you.
Tony Conco, the Community Development Director. I think we may have discussed the timing of the comprehensive plan during our goal setting and where that priority fell out with Blue Heron. We're wrapping up South End concept plan. We're initiating the sign code update, and hopefully we're working our way through the appeals process on the Beaver Creek Road concept plan, realizing that that needed to be readopted and then implementing code written. So I think the decision was made that it wouldn't fall within this biennium, and we could have that discussion again at a future goal setting, is what I recall, which is why it wasn't reflected in my proposed budget.
Okay.
All right, additional questions. Mr. Gifford? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll defer to Commissioner.
Defer to Betty.
oh, gosh, thank you, guys. First of all, Renee, I want to thank you and Nancy for having this recorded. I think it's great. A 2-year budget is wonderful. It's very nice to have, but it also doesn't set well with me sometimes, you know? So I'm going to just throw out some concerns I have. The contingency funds are all pretty high, I think. Right now, we're at a $2 million contingency fund, and you're asking us to approve $36 million contingency fund. That's pretty high, in my opinion, for the 2 years. So, I kind of want to know what exactly, you said each fund will get their money back if it's not spent.
Correct. So if I could, correct me if I start to answer this incorrectly, but on page 1 of the budget document is the budget summary, all funds combined.
Yes.
And in the first table, a budget summary, the total requirements is shown at $132 million, and there's a contingency line above that of $16.4 million. So it's interesting how a biennial budget pulls together. When we presented the 2 annual years together, so for 13-14, the proposed contingency was $20 million, and for 14-15, it's $16 million. We are required under local budget law to balance the funds and show those amounts. However, for the total biennium, it doesn't add across.
No.
The actual contingency at the end of the biennium will be the $16.4 million. So I hope that's helpful. And that is across all funds, and we budget it as contingency. So that allows us, under local budget law, to be able to have the commission move some funds from contingency to the operating budget for use if needed.
But right now on the slide that we have currently a $2 million contingency.
In the general fund?
In the general fund.
So the $16 million, even though it says contingency, is really across all funds. $16 million is all of the reserves or any fund balance that those funds would have. For example, in the water fund, anything that we have saved up for future replacement, for the building of the library, that fund, any monies that is there would be in its reserve unless otherwise spent. So anything that isn't going to be spent by the end of the budget biennium up to $16 million will flow into the next year's budget. And fund by fund, it's actually fairly conservative. For example, in the general fund, mid-biennium, we have $2 million, but by the conclusion of the biennium, we're down to $600,000, which, if David pressed me, I would say is sort of a little bit low for where we need to be in the budget.
That's very lean, if that's...
Very lean.
If that's where you're headed, that's very lean.
Yeah, and so we made a specific decision that because of our commitments on some of the special projects that we have, that we would move forward, but carefully monitor expenses during the year, and then report back in that midterm report. And if we have to make adjustments, we will, because we need to have enough ending fund balance in each fund to carry forward the operations for the beginning part of the next
Right,
year.
right. Okay, then I have kind of one other comment that I just have to make. Okay, I'm on South Fork as long, as well as Rocky and Doug. So you did the South Fork Water Board. We had this budget for a month. We have a 2-year budget for 4 days. I mean, and you want us to approve $130-some million in a night? That's a lot.
Thank you for your comment. Very well noted, Chair, and Commission Member, and I appreciate it. And I think the time that you had the budget wasn't enough at all. And
No.
we had basically having new staff with 7 months to go and to put everything together and pull together a biennial budget. It's definitely a good quality product. We have planned into our calendar for next biennium to get you that a week earlier. And I'll also say,
Could you actually, give us 2 weeks?
absolutely.
I mean, I think that is, because, our citizens are going to ask us, why did you approve that? Without asking a lot of questions.
I agree. The way we used the calendar from the prior annual budget and followed that calendar. And that didn't really give us enough review time at the end on a 2-year budget and combining all the numbers. So I apologize for that. And
That's okay.
We definitely will have 2 weeks in the next biennium proposed budget for you to review the document. And in addition, we're going to hand out at the end of this session a questionnaire for any comments that you might have on how we can improve the process. And I'd love to get that comment.
I'll
Thank
give
you.
it to you, no problem. Thank you. And then I'll wait for the departments for the other comments I have.
Additional questions, comments?
I guess that's the question I have. Are we going to go through department by department, or are we just asking questions now?
It sort of became a free-for-all there.
Do you want us to go department by department? Because I have a lot of Post-it notes.
How many Post-it notes exactly do you have?
at
I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. I'm giving you a hard time.
The
How many
benefit,
pages do we have?
Chair, the benefit of department by department is that if we have a department director that comes up, they can kind of address the questions, might be more efficient.
So let's do that and go department by department. So the first department would be?
General Fund Policy and Administration.
Okay, before you do that, can I ask a couple of general questions?
Yes, you may.
Okay. Is there anything in the intergovernmental revenue besides anticipated grants?
Good question.
Can you point out the page number that we're looking at?
No,
Just to
no.
kind of the roll-up of the funds. It sort of depends on the funds, and intergovernmental revenue would include grants, and I guess based on your definition, there's pass-through from the state for liquor tax and cigarette tax is in there.
Okay.
The majority of it is probably that and/or grants, as you indicated.
So right here in the general fund is intergovernmental.
Okay, and then my second general question was, in your overview, David, you talked about time tracking in several departments.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just explain that a little bit more, what that is?
I use the phrase time tracking.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, you got it? Whoever's got it.
David had sat down with Tony and I, and in particular in Tony's department, which is community development.
Page 7.
There's been additional funds transferred from the general fund for community development operations to cover long-range planning, and then the separate division is the building fund. The building fund had more significant revenues because there was a lot of development going on. Long-range planning and some of those processes aren't particularly tied into general public processes or development processes specific to help developers out. And so there's a question that, a policy question for the city manager, and how much time, Tony, does your staff spend on general planning for the city as a whole versus working for specific developers? And so Tony implemented a specific time tracking module so that he can show where his staff is working throughout the year, and we can designate which portion should be covered by general fund property tax revenue versus development. And it also helps us compare with the rate structure that we have for work done for developers to say, you spent this much time planning on a development, how much did you recover from costs for that specific development?
That was my question. This is not just tracking staff time. This is also tracking staff that we spend on time that we would spend on a specific developer, so that we're making sure that we're getting compensation, equal compensation across the board from?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Good question.
And if you could remind me which department we're starting with?
We're in general fund questions or policy and administration. So the general fund is split between policy and administration, police, and community services. Policy and administration would be, legal, city manager, city commission, finance, human resources. So that would be the first, policy and administration.
So do we have policy and administration questions? Yes, Mr. Gifford.
I want to begin with some kudos that I'm very impressed with this document. I'm very impressed with this document. The first time we've done a biennial budget, and I'm very impressed with the document. I can't. Let me repeat myself. No.
Let me hear it again.
Specifically regarding more administrative and policy issues, I have a couple of them. One particularly is, and although our city manager has mentioned the fact that Oregon City is unique in so many ways, but not the least of which is the fact that we have so many boards and commissions and committees and our opportunities for citizen involvement and so on. But one of the areas that I want to not let fall off the radar, and I think that was one of our mayor's passions, is to the reactivation of some of our dysfunctional boards and commissions. And I was pleased that the Natural Resources Commission got back together again. And I just want to raise the question about the Arts Commission. And the reason that I want to raise this is what I think is a little different in this scenario now. There are a couple of things. One is the fact that we have an organization such as TRAG, which really wasn't as active as it was before. And I'm just suggesting that that could be a pool of volunteers that could help as a source of appointees for that committee. Another issue is the fact that we are doing so much more development, especially vis-a-vis the Blue Heron site, the fact that we have a concern about city art, and I think without a commission we really are just doing these piecemeal rather than having a comprehensive approach to how we want our city to look aesthetically. And the fact that we do have other development that's coming along. And so I just don't see anything in the, there's a placeholder for an arts commission.
Yeah, it's back there.
Yes, it's back there.
Yeah.
It's back there. And I'm not saying that it's the most important commission in the world. Obviously, we've done without it for a number of years. We could hobble along, but I think that if we are in anywhere close to a flush state, I think that we ought to reconsider how we could get that committee re-implemented, and perhaps the mayor can address this as well as the city manager. That's my first question.
Isn't that the only one we don't have reactivated?
Well, that's the one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to reactivate it.
Even if they only met quarterly, something. But we don't seem to have any funding for that. And I guess the question for the budget committee is, how much money would it require to reactivate an arts commission?
I even have a better question, and I know our city manager's chomping at the bit to leave.
Champing at the bit.
Yeah. Which department would head that up? I mean, there really isn't one that it fits under, kind of?
I think it used to be under Public Works.
It used to be.
I want to draw the committee's attention to page 6 of the goals booklet, if you happen to have one. It's right here under Goal 4. It says Revitalize Arts Commission, review goals and implementation options at a work session in 2013.
Yeah.
So we're planning that now. In fact, my assistant is doing some research on different ways to fund an arts commission, because one of the things I mentioned today in a conversation with a citizen was when the commission wants to recreate one of these commissions, I think they're always more effective if there's some kind of funding for it.
Absolutely.
Instead of just asking folks to get together with a wish list.
And the purpose of it,
Yes, right. So the scope of it and what they're going to do, we have some
Yeah.
recent examples from our big city to the north about how not to fund an
Yes.
arts commission, perhaps. So we're trying to look at those various options around the state. And I think Oregon City even at one time looked at a possible fee for a percentage of development costs. So we're going to basically relook at all of that and everything else that's out there, because I think that's an investment that will really, over time, will help the quality of life in Oregon City, and we think it's important. So it's in here, and we're going to be working on it. The reason we don't budget for it here is we don't know what the solution's going to be yet. But
I was pleased that it hasn't been eliminated from the budget. There is a placeholder for it, and I appreciate that. And kudos to city manager staff for staying ahead of the game and doing the advanced work on that. But I am looking forward to seeing a work session on an arts commission.
Yeah.
Seriously, and that would be not next year, but 2013.
Right.
My second question regarding the general administration area, you all know that my passion is neighborhood associations, one of my passions. And one of the issues that has come up recently with neighborhood associations, and I'm not going to be asking for a neighborhood liaison position, which we had hoped for such a long time, and we have a part-time application, a part-time person doing that, well, a person doing that part-time. And doing as well as possible, but it's still not as effective as a full-time person. But that's not the argument that I want to ask about right now, is that the issue had been raised about insurance. And I don't know if that has ever been addressed. I don't know where the neighborhood association budget is. Where's the line item in this? What page?
It's in there.
It's in here, but there's no insurance.
Okay, and I didn't notice, and I haven't, unfortunately, and I'll admit to the fact that I'm so picky that I haven't gotten all the way through this, but I didn't know where that line item is. Can you tell me the page number?
Page 17.
Thank you.
The City Commission budget, neighborhood group costs.
And that's primarily for communications, yes?
Yes.
Distribution of newsletters
Yes.
and so on. So is there any consideration being given to insurance costs? Because as I understood, the commission gave the direction to the neighborhood associations that they should go out, try to find their own insurance companies, and then bill the city for it, which seems a little peculiar to me. Did I misunderstand
I
that?
don't think it went that way. We'll have to go back and review the tapes, because at the commission level, I believe that it went that we would refund a certain amount of money. But I don't believe we were going to refund the whole thing. I think it's still in discussion. And I always say less government is more.
Yeah, I noticed it hasn't been increased, and there was some discussion that it was not enough for the neighborhoods to even send out mailers to every single residence.
Now that they're all reactivated.
Right. So has that been addressed at all, or maybe the contingency would help fill in that area?
That could be done during the budget process. This budget includes inflationary increases on the costs that we had originally had. So that if the budget committee wanted to make a change, they could do that, or contingency funds could be used at a later time after discussion with the commission.
Okay, because that's important for a goal for facilitating citizen participation.
And I'm not sure.
What the process is for us to make a suggestion that we increase this from 25,500 to 30,000, for example. Does that just take a motion?
Yes, in fact, that's the process right there. You've got it nailed. So you could bring up something, and the chair could say, if we'd like to make a motion now, or we could track them and save them to the end and bring them up. I could certainly do that as well.
Which would you rather do it?
Well, let's track, and then maybe we can vote individually as they go through. So would you like to motion that we have an item that we vote on at the end of the meeting before we close?
That would be perfect, yeah.
Okay, well, I'd make a motion then that we increase the line item from 25,500 for neighborhood group costs to 30,000.
Which page are you on?
17?
Can I ask a question before we continue on with that?
But there's a motion.
Do we have
a second before we can ask?
Okay, apparently I have to deal with the motion first.
So
let's motion, and then, so we have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second for the sake of discussion only.
So open for discussion then. Please.
Okay, thank you. Do we have an estimate of the shortage of the funding for each sending a flyer for each neighborhood? Do we have an estimation?
We have an estimate only based on our insurance agent it's not an easy answer, because it depends on what kind of insurance you're asking for. Are you asking
No, I'm not talking about insurance.
It's not just
newsletters. funding for them for postage and printing and sending out
Well,
newsletters.
that's the $25,000 that's in the budget. So that's what is
I've been
identified
told
in
by
that
many
this time.
neighborhoods, though, that there's a shortage. So I was wondering if we knew what
Okay.
that shortage was, or an estimate. Not really.
Okay, it's based upon how many mailings they send out, what type of mailing they send out, if it's a half sheet, if it's a quarter, if it's a newsletter. Typically, like a half sheet is around, I want to say, well, it's 27 cents for the postage, and then the cost of putting it together, I think it comes down to like 36 cents for that particular one. And then that's per household, so depending upon how many households are in that neighborhood association. So like Kenema only has 300 and some, Caulfield has 1,800. So then you break it out that way as well, so I'm not sure.
Do we know the total number of households in the city?
14,400, sorry. So then we break it out by neighborhood association, how many is in each neighborhood association. They get that lump sum, so 25,000 divided by the 14,400, I think it was $1.73 per household that they would get. And so...
So that's about 3 or 4, well, more than that.
Well, it
4 or
depends on
5
how many-
mailings.
So, like, for example, Caulfield sends out 4 mailings, and they've already sent out their 4 mailings. This month was the last month to send out their 4 mailings, and they still have $560 left in their particular allotted amount. So they're over, but another neighborhood such as McLaughlin, who send out 6 mailings, and if they send out any kind of newsletter, it's more expensive. So it just depends on what they want to send out. If everybody wanted to send out a postcard and for all of their meetings, it would be covered. If each neighborhood wanted to send out a newsletter for all of their meetings, that wouldn't, the 25,000 would not cover that. Does that make sense?
So I'll bring Commissioner Smith in here. It looks like you have a question.
By memory, we've never spent that $25,000 now, right?
That's right.
So we've never come to that point.
No.
Now we've added a little bit, but I don't think we have any way of knowing if that needs to go up or not. I mean, based on past.
Yeah. The cost of mailings did go up this year. And we may or may not have an additional neighborhood association this coming year. But that neighborhood association was technically figured in every year because we had a CIC area that we covered with that cost in case they needed to do an extra mailing. So for the first year, I would say we're probably safe as far as like the mailing part of it. We may, on the second year, we may need to relook at that if costs really go up or if the new neighborhood association has a lot of mailings that we weren't expecting.
So I think we should always have, I think we should always have a buffer in the anticipation that another neighborhood is added, but I'm not sure it needs to be $5,000. I don't know what it needs to be.
Okay, well, Katie, I've heard the comment too that people have been told, neighborhoods have been told there's no money for them to send things out. So if we've never used all the money, why isn't there any money for
Maybe
them to
that
send?
particular neighborhood has used all their money.
So it doesn't carry over to
That's
the
the
bunch,
case.
it's just specific neighborhood, I mean.
Right.
That's how we've done it in the past. We talked about doing it a little different this year, and I met with the 3 board members of the CIC at the beginning of this fiscal year, and we talked about if certain neighborhoods had not used all of their funds and another neighborhood had used all of their funds and still had an additional mailing, that they could come to the CIC and propose or ask that particular neighborhood if they could use their allotted amount of money if they're not going to be using it for the rest of the fiscal year. And we did discuss that, I want to say it was in September or October of 2012, to all of the neighborhood representatives so that they knew for this fiscal year that that was an option that hadn't been offered in the past. So there shouldn't be a problem this year, this fiscal year, 2012, 2013.
Divided by the amount of neighborhoods and then the houses within there?
We take the amount, the 25,000, and divide it by the 14,400, and I think it was $1.73 per household. And then if there's 360 households in one neighborhood, then you take that $1.73 times that 360. That's how much that neighborhood gets.
So it makes it up, that's what they do, they gotta come back to.
That's right.
The CIC and ask if anybody hasn't used theirs, and yeah.
And you'll recall, some of you will, 3 years ago, it was a free-for-all, really, about who could spend what, and there was a lot of arguing and staff trying to referee it. So we came up with this formula that we think.
We try to keep it as fair as possible and as equal as possible, but.
Okay, so procedural question. I have a motion and a second. At this point, can it
I'd like to withdraw my motion.
And
You-
I
you want-
withdraw the second.
Then I don't have that anymore.
Thank you.
Do we have additional questions or comments for the Policy and Administration section, or shall we move to police? You do.
Yeah, in general, I just wanted to thank you for the new budget document. I really think it's great. It's clear, it's concise, and I love the fact that you're saving 800 staff hours, because I've prepared many budgets, and it's great.
Thank you.
And I appreciate it. So I have a question about healthcare legislation. And my question is, I know for us in the county, there's a big impact due to the healthcare legislation because of all the part-timers that we have, and if they work over 30 hours, then you have to start paying their healthcare, and you have to track and monitor how many hours they're working. Have we taken that into consideration, and if we have, is it in the budget, and what's the impact for the city? And then my second question is, just on that piece, is one of the other big piece that we're monitoring is whether your plan is considered a Cadillac plan, which I'm pretty certain your plan is, and there's a 40% penalty that'll come into play at some point if you don't get those benefits down below, that Cadillac plan, and if you've considered that and have funds set aside, or what you're planning on doing with regards to that.
Thank you, committee member. Jim, did you want to come up to assist with that question?
Did he say yes, or is he just coming up?
He said, yes, I'll be happy.
No, actually, Jim Leffler, HR Director, I am aware of the tax and that from the Obamacare or Affordable Health Care. In 2018 is when the tax is levied. We have discussed this actually in our recent bargaining, and we are also looking at it. We have a benefit committee coming up, the city benefit committee, with our benefit broker, and at that point, we will be discussing it more. I don't have any, I don't have any current changes because it is 5 years out, but we know about it, and we're going to be looking at it.
And then with regards to the part-time staff, I know this particularly would impact probably your library and parks operations.
Yeah, and we have some seasonals also in Public Works. So yes, the 30-hour employee, we are also aware of that, and we'll be looking to see what we need to do, if anything, for coverage for those part-time folks, or if we have to limit hours accordingly so that we don't go over that 30-hour a week. The pool, not so much. We don't have very many employees in the pool, but the seasonals are a concern.
Just to be aware, they're using, starting January 1 is when the tracking started.
January 1 of 12, yes.
Yeah, so that's when you need to start keeping track, and potentially could get hit with having to cover your part-timers with health care. So just wanted to, I'm assuming that you're monitoring it.
No, we're learning just as much as everybody else is with all the different changes that are going on. Yeah.
Okay. And then this is also with probably, actually this is regards to the general fund. So my question is, and I've already talked to Wyatt about this, on the fund balance, $600,000 is lower than my comfort level as a finance director, and I know it is for Wyatt as well. So I looked at the revenues. I took if you look on page 7, took the revenues, backed out your beginning fund balance. That's about $17 million. Took your ending, or your expenses, backed out your contingency, and that's about $18.5 million. So if I would take the difference, it's about $1.5 million shortfall between your revenues and expenses. And then if I were to take what kind of policy you would have in place for what you should have, and we took 10%, that would be like 1.8 million that you should have sitting there. And if you did 15%, which is, a lot of folks use a 15%, which we do in the county, you'd have about 2.7 million. I realize you're going to have turn back, but I just want to make sure that there's a plan in place to get it back up. And I understand using one-time revenues for one-time expenses, but I just want to make sure there's some plan to get it back up to where it needs to be, as well as a plan to eventually get those fund balance policies in place.
Thank you, committee member Zentner. Excellent points, and I couldn't agree with you more. We have, I believe, the city manager included in the message that our intention would be to, currently we project that we would like to have $2 million to $2.5 million as an ending fund balance as part of our policy. In this biennium, we have, the commission has given us direction through their commission goals to enhance our financial reporting and stewardship generally, including to update our to create our financial policies. And our financial policies will include specific fund balance expectations, as well as several other policies that would be to the benefit of the city. And again, I think I said earlier that we expect that amount that's shown as the ending biennial fund balance, I think it's called contingency in the budget, but is low. And we will definitely need to be monitoring throughout the biennium expenditures and the revenues from some of the new programs we've implemented. And we'll be very diligent in that process. And we will not spend funds if they're not available to spend. So as you know, as a finance director, budget authority is one of the things that we need to be able to spend funds. Cash flow is the other. And we'll be carefully monitoring cash flow. But I thank you for those comments. Very
And one
important.
thing that I might suggest, actually, which is one thing that we've done historically, is maybe to do an analysis of what your turnback has been historically. I think you'll find here at Oregon City it's been pretty significant. So even though we see 600,000, it's probably going to be at least $1 million more than that, so it'll be 1.6. But just so that in the future you could say, oh, based on the 5-year history, here's what that turnback is.
Thank you. Indeed, we have, and we saw that particularly in the past 3 years, the ending fund balance has been much higher than anticipated. So that's part of our comfort level in moving forward with this budget in this way. But definitely we'll do that.
Okay, thanks.
And last year, for example, it was $1,032,000.
Turnback. Okay, yeah. I'm not worried. I know you'll do it.
Great question, Laura.
Thank you.
So if I'm not mistaken, the next department under discussion would be police. Do we have questions or comments under police?
If I might, it's not a question, but since really it's a focal point of the request insurance rate, I'm taking the opportunity to copy the, actually it's an article the Trail News I've written, but so people can have an appreciation on the back sheet, and I'll just put the back sheet forward, to show you what the certain, I need one myself actually, so I know what I'm talking about. But it was pointed out in the presentation by our city manager that in 2004, a Blue Ribbon Committee have stated as a goal for 2014 to have a 1.5 officers per thousand. What I've drawn there in the solid black line is the population statistics. The solid red line is what the 1.5 officers are in terms of number of officers, and then those triangles, red triangles, are in fact the number of officers that we have. We're far from the 2014 goal. I think we shifted to be about a 2020 goal. The request is for 3 more officers, which that solid diamond that I give there would be show us where that is. Clearly, we're still quite short of that 1.5 goal. The other thing I determined was that this is an old statistic, but it's still relatively comparable because you'll see where we were in 2003 when we were flatlined. There was a study made in terms of police officer per 1,000 rates in cities of our size throughout the country, and the average was 1.8, so our 1.5 is, goal is actually less than the average that we see. So I wanted to give some indication there of the justification. I had some doubts about raising this rate, and I talked to both our city manager and police chief and lieutenants about this, and that's one of the reasons I came up with this particular graphic here. There's some other information that's down there, but I think that graphic describes how far we are from our 2014 goal, and why that rate increase is really justified. And that's the only comment I wanted to make.
Any other, oh, yes, Mr. Gifford.
Director, related to that, I've had some philosophical discussions with our city manager and with our chief of police about the concept of tying the number of police staff to population. And I understand that there have been lots of studies done. We had the Blue Ribbon Committee recommendations. We have national standards. We have state standards. But insofar as locally, it seemed to me as though number of police staff, rather than just tied exclusively to population, should be tied to incidences of use. That is to say, you may have a very dense population of low-income, unemployed citizens that have a high crime rate that would require more than that average ratio. Conversely, you may have a more affluent neighborhood that is comfortably packed, that doesn't need nearly as much crime protection as the other. So I think just basing it on the number of people in an area is inadequate. What I would like to see is better statistics on what's the number of incidences that we respond to as a city. What are the number of crimes? I mean, the police department has been very good about providing statistics to neighborhood associations about crime rates, but you seldom see trend lines. You know, I'd like to know, is crime going up? Is crime going down? Is there a relationship between the number of police officers that we have and the amount of crime that we have? And that's just half of it. The other half of it, and this is why I'm supporting this increase of 3 officers, is that these officers would not necessarily be assigned to crime detail, that they would be assigned to traffic. And traffic is another issue, but I don't know that traffic staffing should be defined just based on population, because it depends on the unique configuration of the roads. It depends on the culture of the community and the awareness and other. I'm feeling the force behind me.
Yeah. Let me make a quick comment. There is a table there in terms of crash statistics per thousand, and you'll see that we rate very high.
Exactly. And is that going up or down in relation to the number of officers that we have?
I'm Mike Conrad, the chief of police here in Oregon City for about another 6 weeks or so. And to my left is Jim Ban, who, upon my retirement, is going to be the next chief of police. So we're going to team up here against you here. You know, those are great questions, really, really good questions. One thing I can tell you, just, and I don't have statistics here in front of me, but Oregon City in this county is the busiest police department there is by far. We have a significant amount of crime based on our demographics. We have our traffic accidents and crashes are equivalent to a town the size of Bend. And part of that reason is that we have 2 state highways and interstate running through town, and this is a hub for a lot of people commuting back and forth to Portland, and for a host of other reasons. One of our officers, if we do receive the 3 officers, is going to be assigned strictly to traffic. And that's primarily to reduce some of the accidents we have here in town, reduce some of the speed. Right now, we don't have the staffing levels to fully staff a traffic team or a traffic position, primarily because we are so busy because of the crimes that are committed here. One of the other positions would be used for a property detective. We currently have 5 people assigned to detectives. Each of those detectives works about 20 cases concurrently, which are almost exclusively person crimes. So that's 20 cases, each one of those is working on at the same time, which leaves little time to devote to property crimes. So if you have a burglary or a theft, some type of embezzlement or anything like that, that typically stays with the patrol officer who's assigned to it when he gets it. And he has to work that case in addition to responding to 911 calls and other things. So one of those positions would be used for a property detective who would come out and be able to follow up on burglaries and thefts, embezzlements, credit card scams, and things like that. The other person would be assigned to patrol duties. As most of you know, in 2010, we went from 8-hour shifts to 10-hour shifts. What that enabled us to do is, with the short staffing levels we have, is to have an overlap of shifts for 6 hours out of the day. So we basically doubled the number of officers on the street for 6 hours out of the day. Unfortunately, back in September of this year, what happened is that due to some medical issues, some family leaves, light duty assignments, we were down 6 officers. Retirements figured into that too. So we had to pull our officers back off 10-hour shifts, put them on 8-hour shifts. We had to pull our school resource officer out. We had to take our guy off the drug task force and kind of go back to bare bones policing without that overlap over that we provided to the citizens. These 3 officers put us over that. They allow us not to have to go back to those 8-hour shifts. We can keep that overlap. We can keep that full staffing level going and to address the needs of the community. So that's our reasoning for
I wasn't really questioning the reasoning. What I was asking for, because I support the staffing. What I'm asking for is, and although it's interesting to know the crash statistics of us compared to surrounding communities and to cities of our same size or Bend or whatever those are, what I'm looking for is trend line. Are there more and more crashes per person, per citizen? Are there more and more incidences of theft? Are there more and more crimes of violence? I'd like to know, how are we doing over time? Because if we are adding staff, I would like to see the crime go down, or at least reach a plateau where this is as good as we can do, and adding more staff, because there will come a point where you can't just add more staff and expect it to come down. There's going to be, I mean, if you had 3 instead of a 1.5, there's no guarantee that the crime would go down, my suspicion is. I don't think any of us want a police state here. I like the level that we have, maybe a little bit more, but I would just like to see how are we doing insofar as rates are. I wasn't asking you to defend why we need the 3 additional positions, but I appreciate the perspective.
Sure. Part of the issue is back in 2004, I think we had 33 officers. So over that time, we've added 7 officers. I guess we could go back and we can look at how has that impacted crime, how has that impacted crashes. But there's a lot of other influence besides additional police officers that impact that. One of the things is, say, like Measure 11. Measure 11 has taken a lot of bad people off the street, and we've seen since tougher sentencing laws have come to play that crime statistically throughout the United States has gone down because of tougher sentencing laws. A lot of those types of things arose out of gang violence back in the 80s and 90s, and the sentencing as a result of that. So there's other trends that impact.
And traffic modifications. We've got improved streets and better lighting, and hopefully those types of things are going to be reducing crash incidences.
Yeah, and like I said, I think traffic is one of those things that you can specifically look at and say more police officers can reduce traffic. If you look at other neighboring cities that put an emphasis on traffic, you can see that they have maybe get a certain reputation for being very zealous in their traffic enforcement. That comes at a cost sometimes with the relationship with the police department. Is that a trade-off? Sure. Sure, and I'm not sure which is the lesser of 2 evils. But I do agree traffic is one thing that we can specifically target with more police officers. If you put an officer out there on a motorcycle, all he does all day long is enforce traffic laws. And those traffic laws, I think, would have to be major types of violations: speeding, disobeying traffic control devices, things like that, not stopping people for not having a license plate light. That's how you significantly reduce traffic accidents, is get those targeted violations and look at those people.
And I understand. Not to move you along, I'm sorry, but I did want to get a couple other people, and we can jump back to you, William, but I know we had a question over here on this side.
Right. So I'm asking this question both as a Budget Committee member and as a commissioner. Given that we're the county seat and we have a county jail here, I would imagine that would contribute significantly.
You know, that's an absolutely wonderful point.
And do we have any compensation for that?
We don't. You know, quite honestly,
County budget first.
we have the jail, we have mental health, we have parole and probation, we have a lot of the social services that people come here for. People tend to live close to those services, they don't have to travel to them. Typically, quite honestly, that demographic demands a lot of our attention. That's one of the reasons, it's a very good point, why crime is more common here and prevalent than in West End or Lake Oswego. So it's we are a busy city as far as law enforcement goes.
So, Mike, is there any precedent set by other county seats in compensation that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of.
We could start it.
We could be the first.
We're a city of first.
Commissioner Smith?
The chief alluded to this a little bit, but I think the reasons I already spoke about for the need of the 3 officers, I think is huge. But the effect that it has on the school resource officer is enormous.
Oh, yeah.
And people assume that there's a police officer at the high school every day. That's not always the case. And because we've had to cover for various things. This helps, I think, us get to a better position and making sure that there's someone at that school, which is a city in itself.
And demands a lot of attention. Our school resource
lot of
officer is,
attention.
is very busy out there.
And the time spent there or in other areas isn't always driven by crime. So
Very
it's
true.
just time.
Very
And
true.
that's a ticket, what you can try to prevent. So, to me, I really think you guys need to fight more of it.
You know, we had, just to reemphasize the need for this, last night we had a very tragic incident that happened here in town.
Yes.
And every one of our detectives came out on that. There was 5 detectives out on that. We had to call people from the major crimes team, which is a interagency team, to come out and help with that.
6 detectives.
So we had 6 detectives out.
That we called in addition to ours.
Right. And in addition to ours. So we had all of our detectives, 6 more detectives. Both of our shifts were out there working this. Our guys are still working it throughout the night and throughout the day because, you know, quite honestly, it doesn't stop. Search warrants have to be written. People have to be interviewed. Follow-up has to be done. They'll be working on this case now for another month or 2, at least. And that really taxed our resources at that time. It really, really did. And so any major case like that puts a huge drain on our resources. These 3 officers kind of get us there, but they're still not really where we'd like to go. We realize the limitations of how much we can ask for. And we don't think we're asking for, we're just asking to supplement us just a little bit so we can kind of answer and address some of these things.
I'd like to just speak for a second to something that I think covers a few things that you mentioned. And aside from the Blue Ribbon Task Force, if that had never existed and you came to us and said, what are your needs right now? What do you really need? There are several ways that we would answer this question. We need to maintain what we've kind of created around town that is kind of centered around these 10-hour shifts. And what that idea is of being a little bit proactive rather than just strictly chasing calls. And we've had great feedback in the community about different things that we've been able to do being just simply more visible. It's really important that people feel safe in their community, not just be safe in their community, because they're kind of 2 different things. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're not. When you pull people from the schools or when people have an expectation of how many police officers are going to be out there at a given time, and we toy with that, toy is the wrong word, but what we found when it comes to that question that I talked about what do you guys need right now, Blue Ribbon Task Force aside, we need to get away from this tipping point. And right now we're at kind of a tipping point where 10-hour shifts, we end up having to go back to 8s because we basically start having so much overtime because there's not a whole lot of cushion. And in addition to what you're seeing in paper about statistics and other things that we really feel like we need to address, we really have got to get to where we're just out of this tipping point
There's an employee that is going to be gone for about a month, I found out today. We're having babies at a crazy rate at the and,
Go figure.
So to establish just a little bit of a bumper so we can maintain a constant level of proactive policing, which is working and which has gotten us great feedback, we really need to cement that. And then there's the Blue Ribbon Task Force, so I hope that makes sense.
So we have a very patient commissioner down here.
Oh, that's okay. My question is on page 39. Clackamas County 800 MHZ, what is that, please?
Megahertz.
Megahertz? Page 39
On the
under
right-hand side.
contract services?
Under contract services.
Clackamas.
800 number.
Oh, that's dispatch?
No, that's for our 800 radios, sorry, license for 800 radios.
So what is that for? Can you explain?
Our radios, basically,
Oh.
service for our radios,
Oh.
and all our cars, the portables that our officers have.
Oh, and it's all through the county. So we have to pay them? That's kind of...
It's like a licensing fee, basically, is what we have to pay.
Okay.
A user fee, basically.
Well, we're going to try and get that money back for you.
We're behind you.
Thank you.
William, I'll let you close.
Oh, close. I'm just getting started around here.
I'll remind you it is 8:10.
Thank you. That's all right. I've got nothing to do and all night to do it in.
Yeah.
And I do want to make a quick point first that although we are in and I understand the police philosophy, I think I do, that our goal here is behavior modification, not punitive, reprimanding. And so what we want is people to drive safely and responsibly and like that. We're not trying to issue people a lot of speeding tickets, or parking tickets, because that's not really any sort of a revenue source anyway, and that's not always going to be
The goal of traffic enforcement is to change driving behavior.
Exactly.
And
That's
education.
the point I
Sometimes
wanna
there are
make.
punitive measures that come into play where you have to issue somebody a citation. And we talked earlier about this electronic ticketing that we just got a huge grant for. One nice thing about that electronic ticketing is that it will show us whether or not that particular person who got stopped received a warning for the same
nice.
violation
Oh,
maybe
darn.
a week or so ago.
Can't you just give me a warning? Can't you just give me a warning?
Yeah, we did.
There I go.
So now if I can use this previous conversation as a springboard and back up just a little bit. We have our dearly departed Public Works Director, Nancy Crushauer, God bless her, came up with a scheme. Oh yeah, she's departed from Oregon City.
She's a schemer.
Her scheme of squirreling away, that's probably not the right fiscal term, sequestering, no, setting aside, thank you, setting aside a portion of utility fees to plan for the public works construction.
Yes.
Brilliant, probably not as much public input as could have been done, but it's working, and we're all happy that it happened, I think, for the most part. And yet we're still going to have to go out for a bond to build a public works building. Here's another example. We've passed a library district resoundingly, and we are setting aside funds for a library building, and yet we're still going to have to go out for a bond. Hopefully that bond is going to be paid for by the levy, but the fact of the matter is we're setting money aside. We still have to come out with a bond. We're setting money aside for the Erminger House. We're probably not going to need a bond for that. Don't know yet. But the point is we're setting aside, and I think that's the responsible fiscal way of doing it, is to plan ahead, get as much done as you can. What I don't see is us setting aside, as a budget group, a significant amount of money to prepare for a federally required change that's going to be less than 10 years away. And I'm just asking the rhetorical question, why aren't we putting aside some money to build a police facility? Anybody can answer this. Just jump right in.
Is that rhetorical or? Thank you, Budget Committee Member Gifford. And I believe the answer to that is lack of funding in the capacity to be able to do that.
We are able to increase our millage rate, and we have chosen to do that. 25 cents per thousand of assessed value. I don't know how much. There's nobody that says we can't do 26 or 25 or 30 or 22. I mean, that's basically up to us and the city
You can
commission.
actually do 89. That's how
What's
much
that?
room. You have room for 89 if you really want to get people.
We'll take it. Yeah.
I probably don't want to be part.
I'm not suggesting that we max ourselves out, because I think we've been very prudent the last 5 years in holding the line on this. But if we are going to be opening up the gates in the interest of public safety, it would be nice to have 3 more officers, 5 more officers, but if we don't have the facility to take care of them,
That's right.
I don't know if that's the most fiscally sound thing that we can do. So I would think that we ought to be able to increase that.
This is another thought I had too, is every time we get an officer, we have to provide a car, and what are the other things that
You
we
have to
have
get a badge. You have to buy a badge for them and
really,
stuff.
I mean, we have to, it's just not getting a person. You have to give them a locker space, and, I mean, you actually have to
More
provide
soap
for
in the
them.
showers.
We have that built into the cost that we talked about.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, just showers.
Do we have any other questions or comments in the police section? But
What if somebody made a motion to increase that?
We can do that at the end. That's when we have to pass it.
Okay?
I just appreciate everything that you've done to make the department more efficient and productive. I think you've utilized the funds in the best way that you possibly can with limited resources. So, thank you.
Thank
Good
you,
job.
gentlemen.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
So if I'm not mistaken, community services would be the next.
Sir, Chair, can I go back to 21,
21.
the city recorder's expenses?
Please do.
Thank you. Nancy? Is Nancy here? I have a question for Nancy.
Get her in the hot seat.
I don't want to put her in the hot seat. It's a question. On page 21, under contract services, it says we're going to hire the risk manager person, and you're going to get somebody to manage your franchise fees, correct? So that's going to ease up, according to someone's statement, about 40% of your time that you spend on the franchise fees. So does that mean the contract services is going to be less?
Does that mean what? I'm sorry?
The contract services will be less?
Contract services, you mean the amount that's in the
Yes.
budget for contract services? No, because those are just contracts that we have with, for instance, Granicus.
Right.
Recall for our record storage facility, our
Maintenance.
IT maintenance, our records electronic system. Those are just contracts that I manage through my office.
Okay, so your office won't be taking minutes back on or anything like that?
No.
We'll still continue to
No, if
outsource that?
you're thinking I will have 40% less time, that the 40% that David was talking about earlier was the amount of time that was devoted to, and that's just kind of a guesstimate to the BTOP project. That's
Well, I just want
what he was referring to.
clarification, because it will come out when it's voting time again. So, clarification.
Well, the contracts are just, they're ongoing contracts that we have to function. I don't really spend a lot of time on them, except for when it comes time to renew a contract. You just take some time to work that with the contractor.
So it wasn't actually 40% of your time?
Well, working on
It was.
BTOP was one franchisee, or was
Yes.
one agency. And there are all kinds of other franchise agreements that all the management of that will go to the right-of-way coordinator. The time that would be freed for me would be going back to being a city recorder again.
Oh, that'd be nice for you.
And things such as records management that has been put on the shelf for probably about 4 years that I haven't been able to touch. We've just been maintaining.
Okay.
I mean, you would see miles and miles of improvements in records management.
Okay,
So-
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I believe we're ready to move on to community services. Do we have questions or comments regarding that section of the budget? Commissioner Smith.
Regarding the house, the Ermitinger house, it is, our gap right now to reaching our goal is, I guess, is the money that we have budgeted for the house this year, with that included, we still have a gap, right?
What page are you on?
I'm not on a page. This is in my head. Let's see.
I'll tell you a page number in just a second.
Yeah.
It's
Page
134. So, Commissioner, to answer your question, the bottom line, as you can see, the total committed to date is $531,000.
Okay.
And as you, I think you know, we're looking at a project probably around $750,000.
So there's still a gap.
There is, and we're, and just to let you know, you may have additional questions. I'm sorry, but just to kind of preface that a little bit, we are continuing to seek additional funds. We are in the process right now, in fact, we've just contracted with a grant writer for a pretty nominal amount that we think will probably pay us dividends, and many times over. That there are a number of funding sources out there that we just need to be going after. Now that we have completed, as you know, we've basically completed our architectural and engineering plans. We've got a full set of documents that we can go out to these funding agencies that gives us a lot better leverage to get some funds. So we're going to be aggressively pursuing additional monies.
And I knew that. I just was trying to see. I anticipate money coming from other places, and I was just wondering if we got that money from the other various places, like the city of Portland, how much we would need in order to fill that gap, or would we need to? We're not planning to put any more in the next budget for the house. I mean, we're feeling that this would be the last contribution from the city, probably.
I believe so. Right. That's
And we hope.
That's the goal. That's
Right.
what we're shooting for.
Okay.
And so that ideally, if we're hoping that this would be the last of the city contribution through this biennium.
Okay, and then on where it breaks it out on page 53, it lists, on 53, it lists special programs, including the Ermitinger House, and it has a $13,000 some odd there. What is that, how does that play in with what we have?
I think that's our operating maintenance for the
Okay.
building. Yeah, that's just our ongoing
And that
kind of
just
typical
sits
maintenance.
there, but, okay.
So
That's a separate.
So the special fund on 134 is the dedicated money that is
For the
just for the
restoration.
restoration.
Okay.
And the other is the operating budget, just paying utilities, fixing up little things that, just kind of keeping it running.
Great, thank you.
Scott, since you're on that page 53, can you tell me about contract services? It goes from 808 to 3,076.
Contract services.
Page 53, you said?
53, materials and services, next line down.
What is, I'm sorry, I guess I didn't understand that question
In
fully.
2011, it was 808, then it went 2012, you went
She's on
580.
page 53.
53, page 53. Materials and services, second line.
If I could.
Oh,
specific
I see what
question,
you're saying. Yes,
The
I
increase
got
from the prior actuals to the current year budget.
So what is that for? Is that what the
Yes.
question is?
Yes.
Do you have any idea on that one, Denise? We might have to dig a little bit further into my pile of paperwork over there and
Oh,
find
that's
out.
fine, that's fine.
And get back to you on that
Oh,
one.
that's fine.
Could that be a placeholder as well that might not be needed in terms of the budget?
It certainly could, yeah. Some of the line items.
It wasn't a lot, I just wondered kind of how it went there, but
Yeah, I would have to look at that one and get back
that's
to you.
fine. Thank you.
Additional questions, comments? Mr. Mayor?
Yes, I was, I'm Doug here. Something. Anyway, I was a little bit confused. You have transfers in, so these are grant monies and so forth that you're looking for. I'm back at the Ermitinger House.
Okay.
I'm sorry. These are not committed resources within the city then? These transfers in are funds coming from someplace else?
Some of them are from both.
Yeah, in this dedicated fund for the Ermitinger
For
House.
the dedicated.
Yeah. On page 134.
134?
Let me get back to that real quick here and just make sure that I give you the right information.
Some of that is county block grant, some of that
Yes.
is state, I think, or
Well, most of that is the community development block grant. That's the $140,000 in intergovernmental. The transfers in, and Wyatt, feel free to jump in here. The transfers in is just the transfer from the general fund to the special fund. Correct? Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, and most of that money is from the community block grant, you say?
Correct.
Okay.
We've also received a little bit in some other smaller grants, but the majority of the grants have been the community development grant at this point.
Okay.
Hoping that number will increase here over the next year or so.
Then I just had one other question.
And I've got to, if I could,
Oh,
before you
yes.
do that,
Yeah.
Magically out of the
Out of
air.
thin air, thank you, Magic.
The answer to your question came back that it has to do with the service contract for copy machines, just increasing and just some copy.
Oh, copy machine. Like, we're back in the copy business? Please don't tell me that.
Expensive coffee for $7,000.
Got it.
So it's just an office supply contract.
Okay, good. Thank you. On page 54, we see this beautiful building, the Carnegie Center, and if our library does move out, is there a plan for that beautiful building so it doesn't sit empty for another few years?
What would you like to do?
I would like to have a plan, and you don't have to answer that now.
Well, that's-
but I just
yeah.
want to make sure that that's on the radar because we got a lot of grief when it sat empty for years.
Thankfully, the library's solving that problem for us right now. We'll see what
Yes.
happens in the future.
Yes.
We did, just as a reminder, of course, we did a pretty comprehensive study and came back with a report. We would need to kind of revisit that and basically have some conversations with the commission. I think we'll have I think what we'll have is if the library moves out, depending on the decision making there, is they're not just going to move out in a couple of weeks.
Right,
I
it'll
think
be
they're going to
done.
give us more than a 30-day notice. Maybe.
Maybe,
But
right.
no, we're obviously with the planning that's going on with the library. If a different location is where they end up, we're going to have a lot of time to work on
Okay.
that, and we'll begin that process of revisiting that discussion and kind of revisiting what took place before and
Okay.
where we're at. So,
All right, thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.
I just wanted to make sure
Good
it was
question.
on your radar.
Yeah, it's on my radar for sure.
Just in case. Thank you.
Mine's a real brief question. When McLaughlin House, when the old lead paint and stuff was taken off a few years ago, was that under National Parks or was that under the
Yes.
city?
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
National Park.
National Park
Are
Service.
they going to go after the painter? Because it's all coming off again.
I assume, but I would have to check with them. It's the arrangement is it's fully operated by the Park Service.
So we don't have to
so we
worry
don't
about
have
our
that.
money being wasted on that
Right.
paint job?
That's correct.
Okay.
I'll come back and read.
Mr. Gifford?
Just a brief comment. I'm looking on page 50 about the Pioneer Community Center, and perhaps I'm not completely understanding, but it seems to me as though that is sort of it is the community center, and its use of volunteers seems pleasantly, albeit somewhat disproportionately high from other functions in the city. There's a lot of volunteers, the Meals on Wheels. I mean, there's just a lot of volunteer activity. And I don't know if we've ever, maybe we have before, quantified the dollar amount that we get out of the volunteers in this community. It's not something we can put in a budget, but I know we have.
But that's good to know.
We have issued, we have a $5,000 in this budget for volunteer appreciation and so on like that. And personally, and I'll take a little spin off of this, is that and I think I've floated this idea with a few of you before, that if we had a volunteer coordinator position that would be able to identify who in the community wants to help us build this community and what opportunities there are in this community that we could use volunteers, and very importantly, not allow people to be burned out because they've been doing the same thing for the last 10 years, but to give them an opportunity to do a little cross-training like that. But I think the actual dollar value of volunteers, I think, really should not be underestimated, and I don't know how we account for it.
Well, each department can tell you how many hours.
I thought we did that. I thought we gave a dollar amount at the volunteer. Doug, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, I think we
He's not
do.
looking at you. He's not looking at you.
I know, that's why I was looking the other direction.
Please, somebody give us the magic number.
I think that has been done in the past.
Yeah, I
yes.
thought so too.
But
Yes.
has it been just the Pioneer Center?
No,
No,
all the same volunteers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've done that type of thing at the volunteer event. We do track that. Very good point, William, about the amount of volunteerism that we have at this particular facility. It really wouldn't go without that, and a lot of that is because of the efforts of our staff, recruiting, retraining, training and retaining, and keeping the volunteers as happy as we can. And I think also it has to do with the age population that we work with. A lot of people are retired, and you know, and they relate to working here, so that works really well here. But the point about having somebody, volunteers, it's not that easy just to have them just show up and turn them loose. You've got to have staff that take,
You have to train them.
take care of that and recruit and all that. So it's not, they don't just happen by magic.
There is, and I'm just going to take a moment for kudos to this particular facility. The management of this facility, and I'll even say her name, Kathy Wiseman, I think is phenomenal in the way that the staff and the volunteers are so well managed. It's really exemplary behavior of good management.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah.
No other questions or comments for this section? We have a timeout being called. I think we can call timeout.
Yeah, time out.
Comments and questions focused as much as possible on the task at hand here, which is reviewing and authorizing or not authorizing the budget as it is. So if we could sort of keep that in the back of our minds as we move along here, that would probably be very helpful. So if we move into this next section, do we have questions or comments for the good of the order?
My last comment for the night. Regarding
I record, that's on the tape.
For the record.
But you can't play it back.
Go ahead, sir.
And I'm sure this is the fun that we're going to have to deal with. Is that there is an opportunity. Let me be blunt. There's an opportunity for development at the Cove, and there's an issue that we may be required to invest some money, not urban renewal money, but city money. And if we are considering that in any way, shape, or form, I'd like to know from where would we find money like that? Where is it in this budget?
We'll research that answer and have it before the night's over. There's a basically, we would have to appropriate the funds to be able to make a loan from the city to the urban renewals. Should the commissions choose to do that, we need to identify it in the budget. That's come up very recently after this budget was proposed.
That's all I need to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we move on to next section?
No, I'm good with that one. I didn't know how many posts you have.
That's good. Look at that. So if I'm moving along here, I believe library is the next topic. So I open that for discussion, questions, comments, anything anyone would like to.
I would just say that if I might, this is just a quick comment, if anything here has come out of things that I think were executive session, I don't think we can respond to it.
I only have one comment.
Please.
Is that I do believe we need a new library facility. It's too small, clearly. But I think that, and I'm sure that we are evaluating technology is upon us. And while I love books, I'm one of the people that I don't have anything else other than a hard book, or a paperback book to read. that we do have to evaluate how large of a facility that we do either build, acquire, or renovate, so that we don't have something too large for the future, given technology upon us. So that's all.
I will guarantee you Maureen is taking that into account. You want to call her forward, or are you just making that as a comment?
I just, comment, we don't have to add more
Okay.
time to it. I'm sure we are, but just wanted to throw that out there. Yeah.
Anything else for this section? All right, so if I am not mistaken, Public Works would be the next item up for discussion.
Ooh, and it goes a long ways. And
That's a big one.
So,
it's supposed to.
questions, comments? Who would like to start?
Oh, I do for John Lewis? Oh, yes. John, my good friend, John.
Get on your asbestos shoes, John.
I just have to do it, John. Sorry.
She's not sitting at that table. I lucked out.
Good luck, John. Do you want to take it per section, or just can I jump to where?
Jump away.
Jump away, okay. So on page 91, under budget highlights, you have the following capital projects proposed. And I'll wait till you get there, but the one is Mount View fence replacement for $30,000. Where would that go? What does that look like?
That would go around the portion of the site that we didn't do before. So if you remember, behind the Oregon City grocery store, between the apartments, so on the sides of that, and then on Holmes Lane side. So all the other sides on Mountain View are complete.
So, I would be okay, because I live in that neighborhood. I would be okay if you didn't do that and you kept the $30,000, okay? Just so you know. Then,
That's a security fence, just so you know, and it was part of the original master plan. So our plan is to take the existing fence, which is about 5 feet with barbed wire on the top of it, and replace it with an 8-foot vinyl coated fence that it would match the fencing that's on Mountain View, which is where you live. So
yeah.
I get that. You get the nice fence.
You'll have to have a variance for that, right? 8 foot?
We did get one with the
razor wire,
the original
okay.
master plan.
I'm okay with that. Okay, now I have one more too. Under fleets, on page 111, oh my gosh, green bicycles. Where are they located? How often are they ridden? It's in the first paragraph. You're talking about the bicycles, green bicycles for short commutes. I've never.
Wyatt, I'm going to suggest that you playing a joke on me here.
Well, it's in the sample,
Green bicycles. I don't quite remember that.
It's in the overview.
I see
Indeed,
it.
we
No,
painted the
I'm
blue
reading
ones
it
green,
here.
John.
For the first time.
And I'm like, where did we come up with green bikes?
You just put that in there to make sure people are reading it.
I'm just like, I don't get it. Oh,
Oh, okay.
it's like magic.
We ought to get police.
Okay. Yeah, I'm, according to David Knoll, this has got something to do with getting to and from City Hall from operations, but I missed that.
I just hadn't seen it before. Had you guys? I mean, I don't know. I just hadn't seen it, and I thought it was kind of interesting that we have green bikes in here.
Yeah, I
So
would,
I just
I'd
wondered
much
where
rather a
the-
different color, but
Oregon City colors are red and white. I just wanted to point
I
out.
was going to
John.
say
I just
our
wondered
city
where
colors
they-
are a little different, but no, I'm
I just didn't know where they were and how often they're ridden, and I just found it kind of interesting.
You're catching me at a loss here. We used them, if you remember, to do our sidewalk inventory when we had seasonal employees there. So my sense is this language may have carried over, but we didn't specifically talk about this, so you've caught me at a loss. We do own a couple of bicycles that I know are in the basement that we resurrect every once in a while, but mostly for seasonals, and I don't know if they're green.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I just have never seen it before. That's all I have.
Okay. I have a question. On page 8 of the budget message, and I didn't find the corresponding in here later. It mentions reconstruction of Claremont Way. Is that the water pipe replacement or the whatever, the stormwater replacement, whatever, or is that something separate?
We get there.
It's up, let's see, where is it? It's the,
Page 8, did you say?
page,
VIII.
Roman numeral 8.
Roman numeral 8, okay.
Yes, and it's down in the 4th paragraph under pavement maintenance utility fund.
Oh, I had a question right there, too.
And your question, repeat your question again. I found the section.
There's Claremont Way, reconstruction of Claremont Way. Is that in addition to the stormwater or whatever's going to happen on Claremont? Or
The water line. So the intent is to do the water line first and then pave it.
So it has to do with fixing that water line. It's not just something separate we're going to do.
Well, Claremont Way needs to be, the pavement is shot along Claremont Way.
Okay.
So our plan was to do the water line first. Anywhere we can complete the water line, complete the pavement as well. So that project actually, we took that paving piece out and combined it with water work. So we're going to be doing it under one contract.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That's generally a policy. That is, if you're going to do major pavement work, you don't want to dig up the pavement later to make repairs on other infrastructure. So that's kind of the
That's
way
our
you
strategy.
operate.
Yeah, that's our strategy.
Yeah.
That's a good strategy. That's what you see in a lot of places. You see, pave it and then go back. And
Yeah. Be surprised on that.
I agree.
Anything else for Public Works?
No, I'm good.
So,
That includes pretty much water, sewer, streets, storm, engineering.
Because I guess I have a kind of more of a macro question. We talked early on when David was doing his initial remarks about we've got the water, the ballot measure coming up, we've got wastewater increase, we've got stormwater. Can someone do math for me and tell me how much typical homeowner is going to see as a potential increase to their bill with all of these potential increases? Different funds.
In this biennium?
Well, yes, I guess, yes. So, because most of homeowners are looking at it, I heard that, I think wastewater was like $10 per house per year, and then there was 25 cents increase for stormwater. I'm just curious, if I'm a homeowner going, okay, I see my bill go up, granted, I want to see it go now, thank you, but is my bill going to go up $15 a year, or 5, or, because that will be clearly the impact, it's going to affect potentially a ballot measure.
Right.
What homeowners are going to expect.
I can answer on your water rate a little bit. If we did the 6% increase, it'd be $1.66 approximately a month.
And if I might, I could mention, when I was doing my initial presentation too, I kept referring back to the commission's approved CPI increases. And so it would be, I guess it would change based on how much water and how much your bill typically was.
Right.
But you're going to expect to see a minimum of that cost of living impact, which is 3%.
That's just curious, kind of a rough estimate of what that's going to be.
Yeah, I think that the dollar amount is something we should probably step away and calculate if we really need to provide that answer. I think we could do that, but yeah, I think generally we're looking at 3% for wastewater, water. Stormwater is less. Pavement maintenance utility fee is just a CPI index increase at this point now that we've reached the maximum rate for that. So they're
John, the
I'd
one
have
exception.
to give you a real number.
The one exception would be wastewater treatment from Tri-City. The West rates are going up 10%. That's
Right,
10%.
and that's where I'm trying to, as a homeowner, okay, well, I mean,
Right.
this is going, this is 3%, this is 3%, this is 10%.
Right.
Right.
What is the bottom?
and you have something to add, don't you, Mr. Mayor?
Exactly. That wastewater treatment is outside our control.
It's not our
Right, I
control, and
understand.
it's going to be
Right, and
high.
that's, yeah.
I can tell you there was $11 was our max out on the pavement utility fee, and you'll see it's about $11.23, which says the cost of living wasn't that much in terms of the increase that went to this year.
Right, it's been like 1.7 or something.
Maria has calculated your monthly increase for all fees to be approximately $3 per month.
Okay, I was just curious, so from the perspective it's going to come up the ballot,
Yes.
you guys have an
That's
answer.
for the average home.
Yes,
You
that's
guys
For
have
the
an
average
answer
home.
That's good.
To people.
That's a good question.
They're
Thank
going to
you.
go mad about this water rollback being taken away. They're saying, look, the bill's going to go up $3.
Yeah, you're right.
Do you want water? Okay.
And I think an important part to think about that is with what David was talking about, how we're working on the utility bill to, working on not calling it a water bill, to split everything out, so people think, well, we get a 5% or a 6% water rate increase. That's not the whole bill, it's
Right.
just the water portion.
And to be clear, if it's out of our control,
Right.
identify that.
We're going to put their phone numbers on it.
That's right. Actually, Chairman Ludlow today asked us to put on there the county's phone number. So when it came to water or wastewater treatment, that their phone number would be listed. So
That's great.
we get a lot of those calls now, all of them actually.
And/or you could go to their budget meeting, which I think is May 23rd.
Oh, boy.
Another night of fun.
That's really all I had, was just kind of that number, you hear all this, each section, and
Yeah, good question.
kind of where does that end up? Because again, at the end of the day, when this comes out and the commissioners are out in the community, someone's going to ask that question, you guys don't have an answer. $3. So vote for it. I
Thank
can
you.
say that.
Thank you.
Good clarification.
Anything else for Public Works?
Maybe right.
So if I'm not mistaken, that if I'm just following along in my book, that pushes us all the way to other. Other things for other.
And I'll throw something out. On page 117, this is a great page, I like it, that under materials and services, the meter reader reading contract, it appears to be the same. Is there no, 3% increase over the years? Is that just going to stay consistent at 78,000?
Yeah, we have the consistent contract. Based on the contract currently,
Okay.
that could increase in a future year by me.
Oh, it could?
Yeah, the budget is as proposed as the contract is now. So
Okay.
it's sufficient to cover the cost. And it has been flat. We probably had a little cushion in there in prior years.
You might want to think about putting 3% as the increase.
We try to reduce the cost.
But we have to be
Good point.
realistic, too.
Absolutely.
You know, it's a two-year budget, we have to be very realistic. All the prices go up.
That's a service we contract out.
It is going up.
Meter reading of all the home meters in the city, we do contract out. Thank you. Excellent
Yes.
comment.
To the kid on the red scooter, right?
That's right. I love it. The green
We
bike.
get to get some green bikes.
Other items for other.
Well, I had one more if nobody else does. The downtown expenses, page 119, the trolley program.
I was just looking for that.
119.
19.
Can't go back.
Don't go back.
You cannot go back.
Only go forward. So, this is one of those times where the trolley program is probably going to end, I think. And so all this money is just going to go back into hiring another code enforcement person, it looks like. Is that correct? Can somebody speak to that? And then what would that other person do, and could they be proactive instead of reactive? Maybe they could go out and be a little proactive and not just be in parking. Another,
Behind bushes.
not another parking person downtown Main Street?
Where is it listed?
On page 119.
I'm on there, but I can't find it.
Second paragraph.
The second
Under
paragraph.
budget highlights.
Okay, thank you.
So we're talking about proactive.
Yeah, the concept at this point would be to utilize that code enforcement person for the new sign ordinance would be the primary focus.
Okay, good.
Is what we're looking at as of right now.
Okay.
And that's obviously in the works with.
I just wanted
Mr. Conkle.
to.
Isn't that part?
What?
Isn't the trolley pretty much funded through parking right now, right?
Yes, the
So
parking.
we're not going to take you're saying taking parking funds and use that for code enforcement?
Yes, we are.
That seems weird.
Well, it does, but
Right now, it's running a trolley.
Well, yeah, but the trolley was supposed to be for parking. That's not my problem, but the trolley was supposed to be used for parking. The fact that it wasn't used for parking is a whole different topic. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a
I
problem
guess that's a
with that
topic
as
for a
well.
different,
Yeah.
it might be a topic for a different time, because
But we're going to approve the budget.
because we have,
Yes.
I think there's a whole lot of topics with parking and where the parking funds go and all that,
I agree.
that needs to happen at some point. Maybe that's a work session for that before we get to this next year, because that doesn't make sense.
We,
recommend you do that.
we could certainly.
Maybe a police car.
We could certainly have future, further discussion about
I
the
mean,
use
that
of those
connects more
funds
to
before
parking.
making that
Maybe a
determination.
new parking police.
Yeah, so it's
car.
only committed for the 1 year,
Yeah.
and then after that, we can bring it back and decide. That would be great.
Okay.
Well, for the first biennium, we're using, no, for 20.
We're budgeting for it
For this
for the
year,
first
for
year.
this summer.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. So then the second year would go for a person.
And, you know, I actually think, I know it's a little unsettling to not know exactly what you're going to do that second year with that money,
Yeah.
but I think it's actually a good thing that we don't have that nailed down, because it's a fluid situation. The mayor and I today spoke with the county board chair about parking downtown, and they're looking at some things, and
Yeah.
we're continuing to try to inspire them to look further by putting some matching funds on the table. And so I don't know really how that's going to shake out, and I think it'd be better for the commission to have that information
Yeah.
before we really commit.
Yep.
Well, I like being proactive.
Any other items for this section? So I believe that takes us through the entire budget document, if I'm not mistaken. Before we,
Chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
Budget Committee Member Gifford, to answer your question and also not answer your question, there's some aspect of executive session related to the code development, so I have to be careful about the language on that. There are a couple of funds, the PERS Rate Differential Fund and some funds that have monies that are required to be held but will be spent at a future time. The city has some capacity there to make a loan if it were necessary to do so. We would need to readdress that with the commission at their hearing in June for the budget.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Then I just have one more question, if I could, and this is for Wyatt, just because I just don't understand this part. Okay, so on page 1, we're talking about property tax revenue, correct? First sentence, first column there. And then on 135, we're also talking about property taxes for the fire bond. Is that two different, or does it come out of page 1?
That's a great question. Let me just double check. So there's two aspects of property taxes there. One is the general funds levy of the property tax rate.
Which we get here.
Yes, which is on the general fund tab, and then the other is the specific bond levy repayment amount.
Okay.
You add those two together, and that's the all funds summary number.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
so before we close, I wanted to give anybody an opportunity for a last minute question or
I thought you just did that. Under other.
under other, potentially,
other.
or perhaps pithy comment. Keyword there.
Thank you for all the city employees for all your hard work. Appreciate it.
That's right.
And staying late.
And I do want to say, this is a really well put together document. And as somebody who happens to do this a little bit in his own job, I realize how much work goes into this. And this is a ton of work. And so I'm really impressed by the work that your team has done here. I'm also really impressed by each of the departments and their ability to answer questions right on the fly. You know, and it makes me feel good as a citizen that the city's run this well. So thank you for all the work that you guys do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It reminds me of what David Wimmer would have said. We know some stuff.
We know some stuff.
But I want to take a minute and thank Wyatt and Maria
Yes.
and our executive team, our department directors, because this budget while it's not perfect, and we are very fortunate in our community to have people who will read every word of this, every comma, and help us with editorial comments that we will actually incorporate. This is a draft. I do want to say, though, that this budget is not only the first biennial budget for the city, it's a milestone improvement over the previous efforts that we have made, and we're going to submit this to GFOA for a National Budget Award, which is a North American competition against school districts and other cities all around the continent. Eventually, our hope is to have a history of achieving that so that it starts to actually affect our bond rating. And so just in time maybe for some of the capital needs we have down the road. So thank you, Wyatt and Maria, especially. You guys did an awesome job.
And thank everybody for putting up with all of my questions. Thank you, guys.
So with that, I would move that we approve the 14-15 biennial budget in the amount of $132,387,860 to be forwarded to the City Commission for adoption, and also approve the general operating tax rate of 4.409 per thousand of assessed value for 2014 and 2015, and fire bond levy amounts of $278,767 in fiscal year 2014 and $286,457 in fiscal year 2015. I think I got all that.
I'll second it for the sake of discussion.
So, point of order, do those two items need to be voted on separately, or are they a single item that can be voted on at this juncture with now a motion and a second?
As stated, they could be voted on that way or separately, but committee members and the way it was posted, it could be passed that way as well.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion prior to vote?
Yes.
Please.
There was at least one issue that we talked about that we would save adjustments to the end, and we haven't really talked about those possible adjustments. Those possible.
Didn't you pull it back, whatever it was?
That was the neighborhood association.
Well, the other one was police.
Police.
The other one was setting aside some money for a police facility.
Yeah.
That's the part that I think we have not discussed. Now, given my general understanding that each penny of millage rate accounts for $10 to $20 million, I'm sorry, $10 to $20,000. Calm down.
I was hoping you were right.
Oh, my gosh.
Calm down.
We're excited now.
Approximately $10 to $20,000 per year. And given the fact that we have to have a facility in 2022, federally mandated, giving us, what is that, 9 years?
Plenty of time.
No.
No.
It's not.
No,
plenty of
I
time.
know.
We got to build it, we got to plan it, there's a lot to do.
Yes.
Giving us 9 years to do that, I think, is just barely enough time for something of this magnitude. But if we increase the millage rate only by a penny, and we're generous and said that's $20,000 a year over 9 years, that's only $180,000, which is, I mean, that's not even going to get us a sign.
You're going to 12 to 15 million. Just
When we're expecting $12 to $15 million facility.
Right.
So I would look for other creative ways that we can understand that we're going to have to take out a bond for this thing anyway.
Yes.
And let's imagine worst case scenario or a reasonable scenario of $15 million that we're going to have to come up with in 9 years. Given a bond, are we expecting the bond to pay for the entire facility?
Mr. Chair. Well, you mentioned out of the box, so I'm going to take a leap at that. It's not completely out of the box for there to be such a thing as a law enforcement utility. Now, I know of one other city in Southern Oregon, Medford, that has a law enforcement utility. Now, that utility, of course, is paid by all the tax-exempt entities, so it augments the bond amount. When it comes time to get closer to funding this, obviously, there will be a study done about how we're going to pay for it. I would submit to you that that utility could be designated just to pay for that facility rather than it being on your tax levy.
Oh.
So now, I don't know what that utility amount would be. but
There's
it
another
would be
advantage to
much
that.
wider distributed.
There's another advantage to that, as you have pointed out before, by tying things to property taxes, that exempts all the
Right.
Yes.
tax exempt
Yeah.
people.
And
as
I'm very proud
freeloaders.
that we haven't been doing that nearly as much, and you see those percentages gradually
Yep.
starting to shift off the tax burden of the local residents that you represent. And I think that's just fair.
I heartily agree. So, you know, people chafe at having another fee imposed on them,
Yes.
but the fact of the matter is, it's pay me now or pay me later.
Well, yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
We are going to see our utility fees jump on the sewer treatment plant, almost certainly. It's going to be dramatic over a period of time, double digits over several years. There'll be a point at which we're going to get a citizens initiative again that's going to clobber us. And so we've got to think those things, and if we're going to do them, we're going to have to sell them very, very, very well. And we've been successful in selling many things very, very well before, but the utility fee, I think, is something that people see on a monthly basis, and they know when it jumps now.
Yeah.
I mean, I got a call when somebody saw it go to $11.23, and I said, well, that was cost of living. You didn't say anything about cost of living. You said it's going to be $11. That was going to be the maximum, and I couldn't make the point very well. But the point is that a lot of people watch those utility fees very carefully.
Yes.
Yep, I agree, and yet we are going to have to find a way of funding this facility, and I don't think that we can responsibly just kick the can much longer down the road. We're going to have to find a way of paying for it, and I don't think that we can just depend entirely on a bond.
I think your point is very correct. I
It
do.
concerns me.
And there's definitely going to be a time when staff brings that forward in this, you know, not in the next 2 years, but probably after that, we're going to have to get really serious about how to pay for
Well,
it.
that's the concern, because that takes us to
Right.
something.
And if you wanted it in your goals, the commission can amend the goals, and we would budget that accordingly.
I do have a procedural question, excuse me, just procedural question. Are we going to be having goal planning sessions every year, even though we don't budget every year?
No.
No,
Why
we're going
not?
to do a midterm update of the goals, because these are all 2-year goals in here, and now they're tied to a 2-year budget.
Why not
So-
another retreat?
We're not going to have a full-blown retreat
Not
every
gonna have
year.
an
That's
annual
part of the reason where we lose the efficiencies if we keep meeting the same schedule that we went to the 2-year budget to partially save money on. So, but we are going to have a midterm update on the goals progress.
Will you tend
Now,
to,
excuse me.
Well, so that's what I guess I pose back to the commission, is that the police facility is an issue, staffing it, I think we need more police officers, so we put that to you, as you look at this budget and we get, maybe our tax revenues come in higher, or
Right.
et cetera. Be mindful that we need to set this money aside.
We do.
I know you are, just that, let's get a plan in place.
Yeah, we'd like to hope that everything, you know, in the perfect future, you know, when we have the falls developed, when we have you know, when we have something done at the landfill, the cove, and all of these property taxes have come up, you know, even if we aren't going to tie it to property taxes, we're going to have, there's going to be a population growth, people are going to be better employed, they're going to have blah, 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 and we, you know, we're just all looking through rose-colored glasses. But even without those rose-colored glasses, we're still going to have to come up with the money.
That's right.
with that, I'll go ahead with Robert's Rules of Order and call the question.
Call the question.
So we have a motion and a second. So I believe we are ready to vote. So all in favor of approving the budget for
Aye.
this biennium, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries.
I'm sorry.
Please.
No, I didn't know if you were going to gavel the meeting over, because I had a little a request.
The gavel didn't technically hit.
So we're not.
For the motion. It was just for the motion.
Just for the motion.
Okay.
For the motion. Do you want me to adjourn?
No, I don't want you to
Okay, we'll
adjourn. Okay, so this is another first for Oregon City this year. We have comprised a budget survey. And this form, which will be mailed to you electronically tomorrow to the Budget Committee. This form, you can take a hard copy here. I'm going to pass these around, but we want to know things like, How far in advance of the budget meeting would you like, ideally, to receive your budget documents for review?
More than
So-
4 days.
I have a comment.
More than 4 days, right. So please be as specific as you can. I encourage all of the Budget Committee members to fill that out, because we're going to take that to heart and try to make our process and our document even better. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Oh my God, we got out of here.